Police officers of Reddit, have you ever had an all-units call, and if so, what happened? Story 1. I was doing a ride-along in college in a fairly small city in Georgia when we got an all-available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we were hauling ass at about 120 miles per hour across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, "No matter what happens, stay in the fucking car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it out on the radio like this." Showed me. "If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car." Then he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took off at a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. For the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me and said, "So, when you gonna sign up?" Story 2. 25 years ago, smallish rural town, my dad is a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls to dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secured line. There's an emergency at home. My dad was driving home to take care of the issue when all the cops, probably 4, from my small town on patrol come with sirens and lights blazing on my house because all they heard was there was an emergency at my dad's house. My mother was mortified. Story 3. I remember listening to an episode of This American Life where an officer accidentally locked himself in the back of his car when he went to take a nap. He left his radio in the front, so he called dispatch and was like, "Don't make this a big thing, just send 1 unit to me." Then dispatch proceeded to call out the code for officer down, so then he heard a bunch of cars put on their sirens and race toward him. Story 4. Obligatory, not a cop, but I once got an all-unit call to my house. Backstory. My mom was dating a meth head and everyone knew who he was, and our address. I was around 15 and one night he went off the rails and was beating the shit out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me. Well, the dispatcher heard my garbled yelp and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That combined with his reputation sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions came flying our way. By the end of it, I think there were 20+ police officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night and my mom was mad at me for months. But man, you don't f*** with my little sister. Story 5. Former Royal Canadian Mounted Police here in a small tourist town was working on a regular midweek day shift when we received a dispatch call for a bomb threat in the industrial commercial sector of the town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad, and the dogs got people out of the area and so on. We were roadside when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now we are in Canada in a tourist town, and things are usually relatively calm, but this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all-unit call, they call our neighboring detachment to help. We all split and head to the bank. We arrive, around 20-some patrol cars all around, there to see all the bank employees bound and gagged. Smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realized very quickly that the bomb threat was a diversion, and we immediately were told to be on the lookout for 3 males identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We get the word out to the Canadian Police Information Center and to the airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2 out of 3 of the guys. The last one flew back to his home country, was in Canada on a student visa. We remained on high alert for days after this, looking for the 3rd guy. Canadian authorities worked with their colleagues from the other guy's country to get him extradited almost a year later. In the end, as I recall, about $130,000 were missing and never recovered. For most of us, it was the first time we had a bomb threat and or a robbery. The first time we were guarding an area, expecting to be shot at from an unknown location. The robbers were reported to have AK-47 type looking weapons. Story 6. I got run over by someone fleeing the scene of an incident that they weren't involved in. He just got scared and had a gun on him. I was out of my car talking to the person who called and my partner was trying to stop the person who was really called on. So he didn't even see me get hit. No one knew I got hit or where I was because my radio went flying. Luckily, there were a lot of witnesses who called 911 and found my radio. I confused the dispatcher because I was in so much shock that I came over radio talking like I normally do, but I was bleeding badly from my head and broke my leg. I didn't feel the pain for about 2 hours, so I had that call come out because of me. I'm also pretty sure a policy got made because of me too. Story 7. Buddy's first day on the phone at a fire station in an international airport. Airliner detects a fire in the rear by the generator. They're coming in hot and need assistance immediately. Buddy decides a major airliner incident is imminent. Calls the city fire department, which might have 80 fire stations. They all send every unit, expecting complete mayhem. The airplane lands safely. False alarm. About 200 fire trucks are lined up for miles outside the airport. No one was able to get in because the gate was closed. My rookie friend watched his all units call. Edit. It was a false alarm, not sure if that's clear. Story 8. Not an officer, but I'll share one of my buddies. He was an older gent who has passed on now. But if Reddit had been a thing when he was younger, this would have been a top TIFU. Today I fucked up. When he was still new, he worked in a larger city. They had just gotten the shoulder mics. You know, the ones every cop has now mounted up by their mouth so they can call in easier. When new to them, they wore the cord in front of their shirts, always in the damn way. And great handles when people wanted to wrestle. Jimmy was called one night to a bar brawl. He strolled into the bedlam almost over. He was a rookie, always getting the shit detail, so he was becoming famous in his department for ruining his uniforms. To the point he was having to come out of pocket to replace them. He walked into a vet telling him to cuff everyone still there. They'll sort them out later. Jimmy grabs the closest guy, they struggle a little and go down to the ground. As they do, rip, Jimmy splits his pants, clean up the backside. Knowing he's going to be the butt of jokes anyway, he turns his head to announce to the other officers. Well, that's another uniform down, and keys his mic. Base hears uniform down. So does everyone else in the county. The radio explodes with chatter, but the 3 cops at the bar already have their hands full, so they turn down the radios. Fuck up number 2. Base decides to roll everything with lights to the scene. Jimmy said they were glad of the help when the first few cars rolled up, but they just kept coming. He was known as Jack the Radio Ripper till he transferred. Mine were reprimanded and he still had to pay for the pants. Story 9. Years ago, a friend of mine was a dispatcher for the county. He covered sheriff, EMS, and fire communications, and also worked with communicating with other agencies as well. From the state troopers, he got some sort of text communication. Not a phone text, this was before that was a thing. And it referred to an accident with injuries at the intersection of I-40 and Business 85. Something along the lines of, collision I-40 bus, 85 injuries involved. The way it was abbreviated and written made him misread it. Instead of an accident at 85 Business, he thought there was a bus collision on I-40, with 85 people injured. He dispatched every damn fire truck and ambulance the county had. They showed up and it was a 2-car wreck with minor injuries. Story 10. Former cop here. All units call was basically a riot at a large nightclub in a very rough area of the neighboring city. Once things were finally calmed down and the dozen or so people were taken away, and my boss wanted us all back in our city, I was amazed at not only how many cops showed up, but from where counties and towns I had never heard of before. I looked up a few at the end of the shift, and some came from an hour plus away. Story 11. Was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming on shift, so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly we got a call for all units to respond to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy. He responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn, cause he's armed and it's dark outside, you know. I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me, and suddenly he comes out saying, "You're looking for me." Scared the shit out of me. My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had my knee firmly planted in between his shoulder blades. He thoroughly covered his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad, and I got to go home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. Story 12. Former military police here. Air Force Security Forces, to be specific. I was patrolling base housing doing some training. I had been on station less than a year, and we heard a gunshot. We called it in immediately and started heading in the direction we heard it from. Those houses were duplexes, and the neighbors called it in as well. Dispatch sent us, another police unit, and then the entire external response force. This was on a nuke base, so even things that don't actually have any impact on the nuclear mission totally have an impact on the nuclear mission. We had 19 total people on the scene within about 3 minutes. As the first ones on the scene, my post leader and I were already at the door when the rest of them showed up. I was thankful for them showing up when they did, because we were about to breach the door and go in, just the 2 of us. We were told to hold for 30 seconds while the RF team got set up. Now we had a full stack and breaching equipment. I made a fist and thumped my helmet, signaling the breacher, who came up with his Halligan tool. My leader was number 2 in the stack, so she had to throw the flashbang. One of the RF guys passed it up from somewhere in the back of the stack, and as soon as the breacher had the door open, she tossed it in. All it did was scare the shit out of the dog. Only the husband was home, as his wife was deployed. He was sitting in the dining room on a chair with an SKS in his lap. I was maybe a pound or so of the pressure away from pulling the trigger on my rifle when I realized that this dude's head was not fully intact. The SKS was only in his lap because the sling got caught in his arm after he pulled the trigger. As we cleared out the rest of the house, per procedure, I had my non-firing hand basically stuffed in my mouth to stop myself from puking. The dude's wife had sent him pictures and videos of her cheating on him multiple times and telling him she wanted a divorce. He thought there was no other way out, so he shot himself. The only good news from that day is that we actually had pictures and video evidence to use to charge her with adultery. OSI, like an Air Force version of the FBI, pulled her out of her deployment and got her back on station, and we charged her with everything we could, including Articles 92, 107, 125, which covered sodomy, and 134. She was stripped of all rank, forfeited all pay, went to confinement, and was dishonorably discharged after her 11 years of service. The neighbors adopted the dog. He was a good boy and nobody wanted to see him go to the pound. Story 13. So I interned at the local PD at a time when all stations received new radio devices. The new devices looked a bit like old cell phones and had a bright orange panic button on top. It was meant for situations where, for example, a single police officer was attacked and needed help. Pushing that button resulted in all communication on the standard channel 1 being turned to one-way communication only, so all units would listen to what was going on wherever the panic button was pressed, and an automatic all-free units call. All other units had to switch to the much weaker channel 2 to communicate, but channel 2 only allowed one device to speak, so either dispatch or car 1 or car 2, etc. could talk, but not multiple people at the same time like on channel 1. To disable the panic mode, you had to push the bright orange button in a certain way, think of holding it for 3 seconds followed by 4 quick pushes. It could not be done remotely. This happened in a rather large city where some police stations are closed at night, usually the ones in the suburbs where few calls come in. That night, an older PO closed down the most remote station in the suburbs and decided to shut off the radio devices. You guessed it, he pushed the panic button on top because he thought that's where the devices were to be turned on and off. Without realizing what he did, he locked the station and went home. Since it was the first day of using the new radio devices, quite a few officers were unsure how to turn to channel 2. Basically all communication was blocked. Cue panic everywhere with frantic cell phone calls to dispatch, and dispatch trying to figure out who closed the station, and thus had one of the only keys to open it, so the panic mode could be disabled. This unintentional all units call turned to an actual no units can call, though quite a few units were busy trying to resolve the situation. Story 14. Not a police officer but used to work corrections. An inmate decided to try and fight one of our newer guards. The inmate failed to realize he was a military policeman trained in hand-to-hand combat and just a good fighter. Lol. We watched it on the cameras quite a few times after. Story 15. All unit calls are more common and less critical than movies would have you believe. What you may be referring to instead is a code swordfish. A memorable one a few years back was during a celebrity night. They were doing this charity event with a couple of famous personalities, among which was Helen Mirren. At around 2 a.m., a code swordfish is sent out and everyone rushes to the event. The scene was a coke-fueled bedlam of apocalyptic proportions, people screeching and tearing at each other's faces, a man biting into a live cat, in a pool filled with foam, chlorine, and offal. And in the middle of all this was Dame Mirren. She was riding bareback on a fat, hairy man, slapping her thighs in excitement and screaming her head off. Never saw so much vigor and ecstasy in a single person. She was making this weird facial thing like a horse blowing raspberries and throwing loud wet farts at each other. We tased her, but she ran butt naked into the street, climbed a palm tree and swung away from tree to tree. We caught her a day later when the coke wore off, and she crept into a local kitchen farm to sleep. Story 16. Usually about once a month or so, we're taught that if you need backup if shit hits the fan, call it in, and worry about how many people come later. A unit was on patrol 2 weeks ago and some guy just started shooting at him. All the unit got out was, 34th Street, 1033, I'm taking fire. 1033 is the code for sending the cavalry or officer in need of assistance. It all ended fine, we caught the guy, no injuries, but you better believe every officer in our area dropped what they were doing and went. In another recent one, a mini riot broke out at a candle vigil for a murder victim. An officer stepped in alone, bad move, to stop the fight and started getting his ass handed to him. All he said was, Potomac, 1033, but it worked. We came in, dispersed the crowd, and got out. Edit. Good chance to rant about a pet peeve of mine. When 1033 goes out, there are always a few units who block the air with useless chatter. Hold me responding. What's their location? Dispatcher will come back to my current assignment later. Do they need a rifle on the scene? It drives me crazy. Get off the radio and leave the air clear for the unit fighting for their lives. and every unit not on something absolutely necessary is required to respond. Why would you waste time to say you're going? No shit you're going. Cops of Reddit. What's the creepiest thing you found during a house search? Story 1. Possibly too late to the party, but here it goes. I was a fresh officer with dreams of being a hero. I get dispatched to a call of a family fight. Not wife-husband, but brother-sister. The female reported the male had attacked her. I arrived and located a female and male, the male I knew from prior contacts. I detained him in handcuffs and quickly smelled the strong odor of pepper spray. I found out that after the male knocked off the female's weave, she pepper sprayed him. I knew there were different types of pepper spray, like gel. I'm walking around the house taking photos for my investigation and assessing the property damage. I noticed that in his room, the odor from the pepper spray was extremely strong. It made my eyes instantly water with a decent amount of stinging sensation. The fumes made it incredibly hard to breathe and left me without the ability to breathe at points, requiring that I leave the room to get fresh air. I found a brownish gel substance all over the walls in the shape of handprints. I photographed it and determined that it was the pepper gel that the male suspect was wiping off of his face onto the wall. I found it odd that it was all over the walls and covered the room. I thought this chick dusted him with the entire can of pepper gel. After some investigation, I took the male to jail. I responded to the same house several days after for an unrelated medical issue. There were more family members at the house and the male was still in custody. I was having a conversation with the family as the hero firefighters were saving the day. I inquired if they had fully cleaned up the pepper spray from the male's room. They gave me a strange look and told me there was none in there. I told them about the gel that was on the wall. I then sat there in horror as they explained to me this man had been, for years, cumming on his walls and playing with it. And the gel was in fact old cum and the fumes were the pungent smell of this man's cum room. My fucking god. Edit. I keep a running digital journal of shit I've seen on the job and located this entry. Here's a photo from the room. Edit 2. I'd like to thank the random stranger for gold and all of you for the upvotes. It's nice to know that Reddit really only likes me because I was in another man's cum room for fun. Story 2. My brother is a cop. He told me about this time when they responded to a workplace accident where a rail yard worker had been crushed between two rail cars. The guy had been crushed and pressed into the ladder of one of the cars. They kept hearing voices coming from the body. Muffled voices, but definitely coming from the body. It took them a while to figure out the worker had been carrying a radio. Needless to say, they were a bit disturbed until they reached that conclusion. Story 3. Not a cop, but a former corrections officer. Doing a cell search one time and stumbled across a 500 ml Coffee Mate container almost full of accumulated semen. I was later told it took 7 months to save it up. I've seen and dealt with a lot of shit, but for some reason, that one ranks up there. Looks like someone was really milking their time in prison. Story 4. My dad answered a domestic call at an apartment on the 23rd floor. As soon as he walked in, he saw blood everywhere. In pools on the floor, spatter on the walls and ceiling, smeared all over everything. He walked further in to find a woman crumpled on the floor, battered beyond recognition, and the partner is standing in front of an open window. My dad started to talk to the man to coax him into coming with, and the man immediately turned around and stepped out the window, falling 700 meters to his death. Edit. Yes, she survived. This reminds me of a story from the creepiest glitch in the Matrix thread, except the guy who was getting calls from the 23rd floor didn't find anything. Maybe you're in a parallel universe where there was something to find. Story 5. Tiny, quiet southern town. Whole family that had been dead for a week. Their teenage daughter's boyfriend, who she met online, was visiting from across the country. Stepdad, mother, daughter, and her friend all murdered and hacked up by an axe. The mom was a professor at my university a block away, and when she didn't show up to work for a few days, cops went to the house and talked to the murderer, who gave them some plausible excuse, so they left. He stayed in the house for a full week before leaving. The cops went back when neighbors reported the smell. They caught the guy at the airport about to fly home. The fact that he stayed with the corpses for so long is what is really creepy about this whole thing. Story 6. I'm not a cop, but a paramedic. Went into the lady's house one time, can't remember what the call was for, that had sheets of paper taped all over the walls. They all said something along the lines of, "Remember, the voices aren't real." Gave me a warm, safe feeling. I've written notes like that to myself. It does kind of give a warm, safe feeling. Until I remember I'm the one who wrote them. Story 7. Brother-in-law is a cop. He told me about a time he and his partner were called to do a wellness check on someone with a terminal illness. The family didn't know where he was. So they get to the house, knock, and get no response. They entered the house to see if he had passed away due to his illness. They did not find him there, but what they did find was a stairway leading down to a basement. In that basement was a vast number of sex toys, ropes, harnesses, etc. There was also a stage with a bed on it, and a video camera on a tripod focused on it. He had stumbled upon this guy's sex dungeon. The guy ended up being alive but was visiting someone out of town and didn't notify any of his family. To be honest, I'm glad this one actually didn't end with a rotted corpse. Story 8. Family disturbance call on Christmas Eve 2011. Husband versus wife. No battery, nobody went to jail. But the house was filled with hundreds of knives and dildos. Normal dildos, little ones, great big horse dildos, and every kind of mall ninja knife you can imagine. Every horizontal surface was covered with sharp metal or jiggly silicone. There were even a few new ones under the tree. After clearing the house, we had to talk to these folks with a straight face for a good 10 minutes. It was one of the greatest challenges of my career. I'm now imagining two people going out separately to do Christmas shopping for each other. They spend hours agonizing over trying to come up with the perfect gift, before sighing and going with a good old half-dozen steak knives and a pair of rubber horse dicks. It could be a nice sweater or a tie. Or didn't she say something about wanting earrings last week? Maybe she was dropping a hint. But you can't chance it. I mean, you wouldn't want your other half to not get some dogs and stabbers and then be disappointed on Christmas, right? So there you are, with a new set of Ginsus and a 14-inch double-ended black one, just like last year. Story 9. I was an MP and not involved in this particular case, but child pornography on a guy's computer. The guy was known to leave his room unlocked so people could use his computer. He ended up getting booted from the military and serving time in a military jail while swearing it wasn't him. Well, you have inspired me to not only lock my door, but lock and unplug my computer as well. Not that I have any of those in my computer. Anyways, story 10. Friend of a cop here. He told me about how him and his buddy went to search in an apartment. They looked around and his buddy finally called him over. The guy was just in an oven. Dead, of course, but in an oven. When the guys tried to pull him out of the oven, all the contents and gas of the dead guy fell right out. A few of the guys vomited and gagged. Story 11. My mother used to work for a police department, and I'd hang out there when I'd be homesick from school. This old man used to walk to the gas station in the corner to get a pack of smokes and coffee every day. The gas station attendant called for a wellness check when she realized she hadn't seen him for a couple of weeks in the dead of summer. Cops went, knocked, smelled something, opened the door, walked in, and instantly came back out vomiting from the smell. They had to come back later with respirators, trash bags, and snow shovels to clean up the sludge that used to be the old man. Another officer almost quit his first night on the job. A really bad accident. The guy shows up and the one car has no one in it at all. He's looking around. The guy isn't on the ground anywhere. He tried to figure out if maybe the guy walked away, so goes to look inside for some identification. Finds the guy. He crashed so hard that he slammed up under and into the dashboard. It was just a broken sack of bones stuffed in around the steering column and other parts. Holy f***. That second one doesn't even sound possible. How fucking fast was he going? Story 12. My aunt is a police dispatcher. Normally she takes calls from the public and has an officer nearby respond. But one day she was asked to work the station's radio because the normal guy was sick. That meant she was acting as the central hub of the police radio network, taking calls from officers in the field and issuing backup to them, that kind of thing. She wound up having to listen to 4 cops talking back and forth in a panic as 2 squad cars arrived to check on a reported murder. The person who called was certain that there were multiple killers present. The victim's meat has been cut into 1-inch cubes as if their killer was going to fry them up or make kebabs. The whole corpse had been disassembled like that. Bones cut into neat inch segments and organs removed, separated, and organized. She remembers one of the officers panicked and screamed something along the lines of, "This is OCD movie monster bullshit." I can't remember the exact quote, sadly, and I doubt my aunt remembers it herself. She thought they were playing a joke on her until they called for a hazmat crew to get the body. That poor morgue guy that has to solve that puzzle. Can you even imagine putting that shit back together? Story 13. My uncle is a cop and likes to tell the story of the time he showed up to arrest a 15-year-old who skipped school to throw rocks through some cars and steal things in them. He gets there and knows the kid. They've gotten him a few times from the school with drugs, one time for having a knife. They knock on the door and his 18-year-old brother and 17-year-old sister open it. Cops say what they want and they tell them to fuck off. Cops show they have the warrant for the kid's arrest and that they have to open the door. Gets told another time, and now the other cop car pulls up and asks what's going on. Uncle said they might have to force their way in and break the chain. 18-year-old shithead says he's got a gun. About 3 seconds later, the door is broken, the 18-year-old shithead is tased, and 17-year-old screaming for the brother who wanted to book it. He jumps out the window and gets away. For now. Brother is thrown in a cop car, 17-year-old slaps the one officer, and gets the same free ride and bracelets. They call the property manager and get the permission to enter the house completely to investigate. The second floor reeks. The worst smell they've ever smelled. They get upstairs and it just gets worse and worse. They open the door and find a long rotten body surrounded by needles and other drug shit. They leave and call it in. Uncle said later it came out that the grandmother died of an overdose, the mother was in jail for stabbing a UPS guy, and the kids never reported the grandmother was dead so they could keep cashing her social security checks. She was dead for about a year. Other than that, his best creepy stories were of a guy who tortures and kills animals by feeding them to other animals. Not a mouse to a snake, think more cat to a dog. Or way too large rabbit to a starved snapping turtle. He also nailed several live rodents and cats to a board in the basement where he'd photographed them. And the other is a drug dealer who killed a guy and tried to put him through a meat grinder and feed his pit bull. You know what's sick, and I think about sometimes, is that there's stuff going on now like this that hasn't been discovered yet. I wonder what effed up things people are doing within their homes. Story 14. I volunteer with local PD and I go on ride-alongs often. My creepy thing isn't scary so much as freaky, so we get a call about some squatters in a house that's going to be demolished soon to make room for a freeway. No big deal. Kick them out and go on with our business. It's sunset, just starting to get dark. Our car and the other officer arrive at this place and it's all fenced off and looks abandoned. And by abandoned, I mean it looks scary as hell. It was like an old school house, metal swing set, and a friendly scarecrow next to a fence. Some crosses here and there, but it was in a residential neighborhood. On the blocked-in windows, people wrote in Sharpie all kinds of spooky stuff. This place belongs to us, and just all-around weird shit. Like even creepier than that. So there was a main house, a garage-type thing, and then a cellar. A fucking door leading underground with creaky-ass wooden steps. And so if you walk down those, it's concrete and there are windows. But it's a basement. The windows just show dirt. They're beds and stuff, but it looks like it's been abandoned for a long time. It was so scary, it's ridiculous. If this comment gains any traction, I'll drive over and take pictures of it. I know it's still up. Edit. I'll go snap some pictures today after class. It should be up around 2 p.m. California time. Update. I went and checked it out. I guess they demolished it because it was a haven for squatters and homeless people, and some people still live in the surrounding houses. I don't know why they demolished it because I was there with my girlfriend maybe 2-3 months ago, and I figured it would still be up. Sorry guys. I did, however, get some pictures of the demolished land, a screenshot from Google Maps that gives me a little proof. This was my first chance to deliver as OP and I disappointed you all. Story 15. Trooper here. Responded to a fight between two brothers and another unrelated black male. All these guys were in their late 30s or early 40s. Get them separated. They were all drunk. Turns out the bigger of the two brothers and the other male were fighting over who got to have sex with the other brother. They had been raping him for a while. All three were low functioning. Not really creepy, but I'll always remember that one. Nope, I would definitely classify that as creepy. Story 16. Creepiest. A dead guy, but not just your average dead guy. This guy died on his couch surrounded by no less than 1,500 Miller Lite cans. Plus he had no friends or family. None. He was retired and his electric bill was auto-deducted from his checking account. He died on his couch and no one realized it for 5 months. When we found him, the top, front really, because he was on his back, was completely skeletonized, but the bottom, or back against the couch, was still meaty and rotting. The half-skeleton was kinda creepy, but it's really creepy and sad that this guy left this world and it didn't affect anyone. Just gone and forgotten. Funniest. Respond to a burglary. Going through the house with the homeowners, a young married couple, documenting damage and loss. Step into the bathroom. There's a red vibrator on the floor. They look at it, I look at it, and then we look at each other. Spend the next 5 minutes with locked eye contact talking about the broken window, missing jewelry, missing TV, etc. Everyone refusing to look at, discuss, or acknowledge the vibrator. Then on to the living room. Oh, there was also the dead fat lady with a pug that started eating her asshole. Yeah, it's pretty easy to miss a dead fat lady with a chewed up asshole. Story 17. Taking this law class, my professor brings in a cop to talk about points of law. At one point, the cop shows the class a picture of a man who committed suicide by gun. Can you see what color his eyes are? He asked. Of course no one can, and after some dumb stares the cop says, blue. One blue this way, the other blue that way. The whole class groans and I raised my hand. Obviously you have thicker skin about this sort of thing than we do. Have you ever seen anything that got to you? The cop got serious looking and then told us this story. A local family, 2 brothers, both young. Every Saturday morning the older brother would get up early and make toast, and both he and his younger brother would sit in front of the TV, munch some toast, and watch Saturday morning cartoons. This one Saturday, the older brother didn't want to get up and make toast, so the younger brother decided to try it himself. He apparently went into the kitchen, put the bread in, and pulled the switch down. He didn't notice how close the toaster was to the kitchen window curtains. To make a long story short, the house caught fire and the parents barely made it out alive with the oldest son. By the time the police officer arrived, the younger boy was dead, burned to death in the living room. The officer said he must have set the toaster and went into the living room to watch TV and wait for his older brother to wake up and join him. The officer said the window nearby had collapsed from the heat and melted around the little boy. The cop said he had 2 boys about their age at that time, said he had to excuse himself from the scene, went to his squad car and couldn't stop crying and shaking. As the cop told the story in class, he started crying again. Story 18. This one wasn't mine but from an EMT friend. It's also maybe not so much creepy as nasty, but it makes my hair stand on end whenever I think about it. In one of the apartments in a nearby city, the apartment manager went in to investigate a really bad smell in one of the lower units. Apparently people all around it were complaining. Once he saw what was up, he called the ambulance. So first responders show up, which includes said EMT friend, and there's this lady sitting on the couch. There's also something squirmy going on down below her underpants area. So they check her out, and in the process removed said undergarments. Out falls a swarm of maggots. Yes, her lady bits were covered in them. Apparently said individual had a fairly strong substance abuse problem. Some of the needles she poked into her nethers, which caused an infection. This led to rotting flesh, which attracted flies, which in turn led to maggots. The worst part? She was not dead. Just so drugged up that she basically never noticed that she was literally rotting and falling apart from the waist down. Story 20. I spent my first year as a constable in an inner-city suburb of Queensland. Now, of the population of this area, something like 40% was reserved for government-commissioned housing for rehabilitated criminals and persons released from mental health assessment centers. So here was a share of creepy shit. But to be fair, for the most part, the people we dealt with were more like cartoon characters than super shady creeps, but they had their moments. One guy that we had met before just decided one afternoon to start destroying shit in the commission set of units he lived at. He was going fucking off, kicking through latticing, throwing pot plants off of buildings at passers-by, stealing and collecting people's shoes, and smashing car windows. After about 15 minutes of mayhem, he must have ran out of steam and gone back to his unit. That's where we found him, and he decided to bung on the turn. He just would not stop screaming and bashing his head and face into any surface or object he could find. Eventually, we got a van with a pod and secured him. Then we went back into his house to figure out what the fuck had happened. The house is a cluster. Somehow he had fit 2 Coles trolleys inside and was using them as furniture. The whole place smelt of rotting food and shit. On the coffee table, if you can call it that, are a series of scrawled notes of just expletives. Again, not massive mental function with this guy, and a wooden box. Inside the wooden box were about 100 small clip seal bags. Over half the bags had a brown granular organic matter in them. The others had clear crystal-like stuff in them. The brown bags were somewhat organized from smallest to largest staples. Now with the type of people we had in the area, we had all sorts of wonderful ways these people got high. We were used to seeing weird shit that people would ingest. So we don't recognize these bags, but we've got a pretty good idea it's a narcotic of some kind. So of course we examined these bags and their contents. There was enough there to test if need be, so I get one of these bags and empty the contents to see it better. So these samples of brown material. They've got flecks of color and little tendril-like hairs, not unusual for a plant derivative to have, but I've never seen it before. So I'm looking at it as I hold talking to my partner that it might be really coarse hash derivative or a byproduct of the production of something else. Cat, maybe. Might explain why this guy went nuts. A dog unit officer who assisted with the arrest comes in. He sees the scene, looks at the coffee table, looks at the bags, and looks at me holding the contents of one in the palm of my hand, and straight away says, "The guy got golden staph. He's been collecting scabs." This guy had been picking at a golden staph infection on his leg, collecting the scabs, organizing them into smallest to largest, then eating them. The small yellow crystals, snot and crust from his nose. Same end goal. The shit was fucked. I bought shares in Persil hand sanitizer after that. Story 21. Not a cop, but my brother is an EMT that told me these 2 stories. Cops got called because some children were wandering around in the yard of a house in the evening. Neighbors had never seen those children, and there were no parents or other people. No lights on in the house or any signs of somebody being home. The children weren't wearing any clothes. They approached the kids. The children are 6 to 10 years old, but talk in an indistinguishable language or basically gibberish. Cops call for backup in an ambulance because this gets freaky. They take care of the kids outside. Nobody knows what the kids are saying. They're very pale, like they've never been out in the sun. Cops enter the house, no electricity. It's dark, so they use their flashlights. House seems to be used, yet is cluttered and not well taken care of. They look around and find a crib with something laying in it. No sound. No movement. Shit. One of the cops goes outside, can't handle it. Other officers walk in. Relief. It's just a doll. Real bad case of neglect. Parents apparently left for the day and forgot to lock up the kids. Another story. Cops got called to a house. They enter and look around. They walk around the house and check the cellar. They find rooms with doors similar to prison cells. Kids inside. They can talk but can't see because there was no light in their cells. Their eyes didn't develop properly. Because my brother is an EMT, he doesn't know the end of the story, but this freaked everybody out. Story 22. Not a cop, but a former officer of the law told me this years ago. I will let you decide if he's full of shit or not. The officer had responded to a parent's call to arrest their son, whom they were convinced had relapsed on meth. What had tipped him off was when the son had started blasting both thrash metal and porn on max volume from his bedroom and locked himself in. Communication with the kid was impossible with the noise. However, the officer's partner had been able to glance into the kid's window and could see that he was sitting motionless in front of his computer. He was shirtless, but otherwise, everything seemed rather normal. With permission from the parents, the officers decided to push through the lock. Moans and groans and relentless guitar deafened the ears. The only light illuminating the room was the bluish hue of the computer monitor. The kid's face was a distorted grin, stretching to his lips' furthest limits. He wasn't shirtless. He was in fact naked and drenched in sweat. And in his right hand, cupped like a chalice, were his testicles, which he had ripped off in a flurry of drug-induced self-mutilation. Wow, that fucking hurt to read. Story 23. Had a buddy I worked with as a retired officer. He was driving past and saw a multi-car rollover on the interstate, so he calls the ambulance and starts to look for people who got ejected from the cars. Found all the passengers except for one. Most of the people died, by the way. Finally, the ambulance and the fire truck come and he's trying to find the last person. Turns out it was a little girl and she was face down in the asphalt, but still moving weakly. Who went to go get her when the fire truck ran over her head. Scarred him for life, he said. Story 24. And my grandparents on vacation in Iowa. They lived in the middle of nowhere, with a couple of elderly neighbors in cornfields for miles. It was like 2 a.m. and I was gonna go have a smoke before bed. Their back porch had a big sliding door. Well, I walk into the room with a sliding door and there's a guy in a creepy mask like this, and his eyes are jet black. He's quietly wiggling the door, trying to open it. The lock is weird and lets the door have like an inch of free play. I got so scared I felt my butthole clench up, and I dropped my cig. Right then the guy freezes and looks right at me. He pauses, then starts frantically shaking the door, trying to open it, like this dude is trying to rip the door off the fucking house. I run over to my grandpa's gun cabinet and grab something. I didn't know what it was, some old gun, and by the time I whipped around to point it at him, he was gone. I ran and woke up my grandparents. We all walked around the house with loaded guns for a minute, but the guy was gone. A couple of weeks later, some bald guy walked out of the cornfield wearing a dress. He stood by the highway for half an hour, then got picked up by some sketchy car. I won't even go in cornfields in broad daylight anymore. Story 25. Friend is a cop. Wellness check called in. Went in, smelled horrible, and discovered a large dead guy, shirtless, sitting in his front room, in a lawn chair watching TV. He had set up an industrial space heater behind his chair, which was on at full blast. Due to the heat, and apparently other factors, he had merged through the back of that lawn chair. Story 26. We went to an apartment which was a local drug den. A female we knew called and said the male renter had been assaulted and she had run. We got there and the door was bolted shut. I kicked the door over and over again and it wouldn't open. What I found later is the dope team had done a search warrant on the apartment a couple of weeks earlier, and afterward the tenants had reinforced the door jamb with a metal plate. It took me a total of 22 times kicking the door before I broke the deadbolt in half, which flew across the room and hit the wall. We made entry, guns drawn, and started clearing the apartment. This place was the kind of spooky I've only seen in places where a lot of meth is done. It was dark, there were swastikas, 666, upside-down pentagrams, etc. painted on the wall. Pictures of faces hung on the wall with the eyes X'd out, and baby dolls with their eyes scratched out into X's. As we cleared the first room, we started seeing the blood. First on the bed, then a trail on the floor leading into the back room. The layout was weird. One main room, then a back room which is more of a hallway, and the bathroom at the end of that hall. We followed the trail of blood down the hall to the bathroom door. In front of the door was the renter's dog, which was shaking uncontrollably and pissing all over the floor, scared out of its mind. As we got closer, the dog got really aggressive because it was scared. Made my way around the dog and entered the bathroom, where I found the renter hunched over in the shower, bleeding from his face, holding his cheeks with his hands. He was frantically trying to talk, pleading with us not to hurt his dog. Blood was dripping from his mouth and I couldn't understand him. Then I saw the extent of what happened to him. His jaw had been dislocated on both sides when he was beaten by 2 men with a hammer, and it was just hanging there. As he was trying to plead with us, he could only attempt to talk by flicking his blood-covered tongue in pattern of the words because his jaw didn't work at all. Seriously, what the f***? Story 27. Not a cop, but a fire investigator. We were working a scene where 2 kids had died after a space heater caught on fire, the dad was playing poker down the street, and the mom was with some other man down the street. The fire department came in and cleaned out the scene, and we came in after. As we were sitting through the ashes to find components for the space heater, we found the 2-year-old foot. Mind you, this was after dark so we could barely see and we were using flashlights. It was a bit creepy. Story 28. One time a dude has 3 years worth of videos he took of boys and men of all ages using the public library bathroom. He said it was common for guys to go in there and jack off. I had no idea. He said most people had no idea they were being recorded. Others knew, but just didn't care. He also had 2 external hard drives full of every kind of twisted porn imaginable. Again, involving all ages. This is more bizarre than anything else in your post. I've heard of voyeur fetishes before, and everyone on the internet knows about the extremophiles who search for shock videos to get a thrill. But the idea of somebody whacking it in the library bathroom and not caring that some perv is filming them is fucking weird. Story 29. Funny and irrelevant story. My cousin is a cop and a little on the short size. Minimum requirements for a New Zealand police officer. During a search of a house, he was using a 20-liter paint container to stand on to assist in searching higher areas of the house, i.e. closets and such. At the completion of the search and after 3 hours they had found fuck all. My cousin then looked in the paint container he was using the whole time to stand on, thinking it would be just paint, but instead it was full of weed. About 20 kilograms of quality-grade Coromandel gold. Laughter ensued. Edit. This story was told to me by my police officer cousin, so let's assume some exaggeration of the weight of the weed occurred during the retelling. I don't smoke it, so I don't know. It was a big bucket. Don't miss the point of the story. Edit 2. Yes, thanks to all those that pointed out that NZ police has no height restrictions. They have no height restrictions anymore. They used to, years ago when my cousin and I applied. He's 5'6" and at the time that was borderline. Story 30. This one is from an MP friend of mine, so take it with a grain of salt. My buddy was a duty officer one night and as such, he had to respond to serious events. One night there was a fire alarm and he and a bunch of MPs rolled on it. This was a real fire. False alarms are pretty common. The source turned out to be an officer's apartment. When the investigation was conducted, it was found that the officer had filled a bathtub with fuel and field manuals, and decided to suicide by sitting in the tub and igniting the fuel. After a few seconds, he decided that this was a bad idea and ran from the tub to his apartment door before the death finally took him. So the responding MPs found his charred remains and the bits of burning flesh that were falling off him as he ran for the door. That seems like a terrible way to commit suicide. Surely he had access to a gun. What would you want to burn to death? Story 31. Less creepy but more of a surprise. Get a call for a burglary. I'm doing a walkthrough with the resident noting all missing and damaged property. He was an older guy. We were in the bedroom looking in drawers. I open one and see it full of women's panties and bras. I ask him when his wife will be home to help identify missing items. He stutters a little bit and finally says, those are mine. I just closed the drawer and went on with my investigation. We are all a little weird, bro. Far be it from me to judge you for wearing pretty underwear. Story 32. Not a cop, but I worked alongside adult protective services and sometimes cops. The place smelled absolutely dreadful. The elderly lady was dead sitting upright on the couch. She had shot herself a watery one at the time of death apparently. That's not the only thing that smelled bad. There were buckets of shit. Literally dozens of buckets filled with fecal matter in every room of the house. One of the cops didn't have a face mask and he almost puked every time he coughed or sneezed because of all the dust and the putrid smell. Apparently, the elderly lady lived in the home with a few of her brothers. Some homeless people that were squatting in the backyard were the ones that called the police because they saw the brothers leave, but hadn't seen the lady in days. The smell coming from the house also raised some red flags. Story 33. Former LEO with 2 stories. Got dispatched to a call. Daughter has tried to reach her elderly mom and can't make contact. These usually end badly. Made location at the house and received written authorization from daughter to make forced entry at the front door. Asked the daughter to wait by the squad car and had the fire department spread the door frame open. Immediately noticed the smell and began to search the house. Found the mom in the kitchen laying in the open door of the oven. Half of her face and hair were burnt off and the oven was still cooking her. Apparently we found out from the daughter the mother used the oven for heat and had a heart attack and fell on the oven door. Best thing I can say, it looked like Harvey Dent from the Nolan Batman film. The second story got a call from dispatch about a woman screaming from an abandoned apartment, saying she was being tortured or killed. My partner, 4 other officers, and I had to search every room and door in what looked like a college dorm. All the doors faced inwards, and there was absolutely no way of knowing where the screaming was coming from. Partner found the woman covered in her own blood running out of an apartment. I held the apartment door while he ran her down. Scariest call of my life. Turns out she was tripping on PCP and had been cutting herself. There was no way of knowing that until we searched the apartment. I swear the Michael Myers, Krueger, or Chucky was sitting waiting behind every door in that apartment, waiting to stab me. Awesome time. Story 34. Some guys were four-wheeling at a local lake in an old topless Ford Bronco with no windshield. It rolled and threw everyone out but the driver. It was remote and took us a while to get there. When I arrived, everyone that could move was kneeling against the Bronco. When I walked up to it, I could hear screams coming from underneath. It was agonizing, those screams. I shined my flashlight underneath and I could see the guy's face. His head was so deformed from the weight of the vehicle and he was still alive, just screaming. Fire department was still a few minutes out and we didn't have anything to lift it off him. The kneeling people were apparently trying to lift it off. Then they reverted to digging. It was horrible. Such a helpless feeling for what seemed like an eternity. The screaming eventually became low moans that eventually stopped. The guy passed away before we could get him out. This was my first year as a police officer. Later that night, early morning, I had to go tell his wife about his passing. Death notification. It was really hard not to break down crying with her. She wanted to know more details, and all I could think of was the screaming. I'm not sure she ever learned the horrible details we encountered that night, but I didn't tell her. Those screams woke me up many nights for years after. Eventually, they get replaced with new human tragedies. Story 35. Not me, but a friend. He and his partner were at the time working in a smallish town, so most calls were regarding suicides or elderly people. This day, they checked up on an apartment of an elderly, which they presume is dead due to the horrible smell. In cases like this, they would take turns in who would be the one going in to check on things. This time, it was my friend's partner. 5 minutes after going in, he comes out with a shocked look on his face, completely wet and covered in all kinds of nasty fluids. When he went in, it had been completely dark, so he probed around trying to find the light. Suddenly, he slips into a pool of something, and when he landed, he knew the worst had happened. He slipped in the fluids of a corpse and landed in it, so to say, getting submerged in a completely rotting human corpse. Bad day at work, I'd say. Story 36. Australian here, worked remotely enough for some good stories. Late at night, called to a drunken dispute where a firearm had been discharged. Attended with 4 or 5 of us, the whole patrol group. Found the gun, which was all good. My partner went to unload it and realized it had no trigger. He went to touch the safety and paused. We both had a closer look and then asked the owners. Apparently the safety was the trigger. Anyways, no one was licensed, so we searched the house for extra ammo or other weapons. No one is really supposed to have guns here unless you have a good reason. Don't know why I did it. It was a dumb idea given the state of the house and the area. Dog poop on the floor and stuff, and nappies everywhere. I opened the fridge, staring face to face with a kangaroo with its paws out looking at me. That was the top shelf. I looked down one shelf and there was the other half of the kangaroo, tail hanging down off the middle shelf. The smell. Oh dear, the smell. The light was on. Not sure the fridge actually worked though. Closed the door pretty fast. Of course, the most reasonable thing to do was move to another part of the room and yell at my partner to check the fridge. Not really creepy, just unusual. I was newish at the time. Story 37. A friend was a cop and I'll never forget the sex dragon story she told. She was responding to a domestic with her training partner. This was her 3rd month in the job. Parents had called the cops on their son. The police found a stuffed toy dragon in the son's room with a hole cut in it, filled with old semen. But the toy dragon was the tip of the iceberg. Turns out the 14-year-old son had been raping his 8-year-old sister, 11-year-old brother, and 5-year-old male dog for the last 2 years. The son gave absolutely zero fucks that he was hurting other people. He just wanted to get off. Story 38. I'm no longer a cop, but it wasn't because of this scene that I left the profession. Got a call from a wife that her husband had died or committed suicide in their backyard shed. I was the first on the scene and she directed me toward the backyard and told me that the door to the shed was around on the side. I walked around to the side of the building and saw a guy in full French maid attire hanging by the neck. The garage ended up being a super kinky sex dungeon filled with leather whips, dildo machines, weird pics in the walls, and buckets of liquid. The best part was that the whole place was wired for video and sound. It ended up being a case of autoerotic asphyxiation gone wrong, and his wife was mortified that the whole sex dungeon thing had gone out. Story 39. We got sent to a well-being check for an old lady that lived by herself in a rough section of the city. This was a few years back, but if I remember correctly, she had no family or friends. Some sort of wellness aide called it in. No one had heard from her in a few days. We knock and knock, announce ourselves, but nothing. We get a property manager on the phone. He comes by with a key. We open the door and there she is, very dead on the floor. A look of fear, pain frozen on her face. One of her feet was detached in about a meter, I'm using metric to avoid bad puns, away from her body and blood everywhere. I instantly assumed she was murdered and got a shot of adrenaline, but then we take a second and take in the whole scene. This is how the woman died. She needed to adjust her blinds, so she got a chair from the kitchen, stood up on the chair, lost her balance, fell, and landed on her foot, which snapped clean off her leg. She then proceeded to crawl around bleeding until she passed out and died. I've seen much worse, but that one sticks with me because I can't even imagine the thoughts running through her head as she was dying, all alone and unable to summon help. Story 40. My dad was a state cop. Yeah, shut up, it counts. He responded to a call in a rural area once. The couple involved were known repeat domestic violence or battery offenders. This time, the lady apparently had had enough, and either shot the guy in self-defense or shot him point blank. When my dad entered the trailer, he told me he could see a trail of dark muck on the floor. Some spots were more splattered, thicker than others, but it was clearly a trail as if something had been dragged. My dad and his partner followed the slick through the front room, where the man had been shot. He crept down the hallway and into the kitchen where they saw the man himself. He had dragged himself, bleeding from the chest or stomach, through his house trying to reach a phone. He made it into the kitchen where he managed to hook his chin onto a table. So his chin was still on the tabletop and his body kind of drooped under him with his legs kicked out behind him. Story 41. My dad is part of CSI and tells me odd stories every day as he comes home. A heavily obese hoarder was living in her apartment, everything filled head to toe with rotting food, wrappers, and piss. She had the common decency to use her shit-covered toilet and did so. But on that particular day, it wasn't just the good old number 2. It was also a baby that had been rotting inside of her for months. The poor creature fell out of her in chunks, and its limbs just kinda exploded all around the toilet. A nice baby soup that had to be fished out of a toilet by 2 officers and seemed to have shaken them up for a day. And I'm done.
Cops of Reddit. What's the most suspicious thing you've ever caught somebody doing for a totally legitimate reason? Story 1. I know I'm kind of late here and it's another I'm not a cop but kind of situation, but I'm kind of hoping this cop uses Reddit and we'll see this. One night I was coming home from a friend's house. It was like 1 or 2 a.m. And their house is known for a bit of partying, and this was a relatively rural area, so cops don't have much to do. I hadn't been drinking or anything that night, and there wasn't a party, so as I'm driving home down the windy back roads, I hit a skunk. Well, I didn't hit it. It went basically right under my car, and I heard a bit of noise. I keep driving, but after about 5 or 6 minutes, my AC starts popping out the worst smell you've ever smelled. I know it's a skunk. I'm only like 10 minutes from home, so I try to stick it out. I roll down the windows and kind of stick my head out Ace Ventura style. It's not working. The smell is overwhelming. Now I have to vomit. I pull over, put my hazards on, and start puking on the side of the road. After a minute or so, a cop pulls up and puts his lights on, and I'm still vomiting. He gets out and sees this mid-20s dude with tattoos and a nose ring puking. As he's walking towards me, he starts saying, well, looks like maybe someone had a bit too much to drink tonight. Oh, Jesus Christ, what the hell? As he's walking by my car, you can smell the skunk. He starts dry heaving and pukes a little bit while through my vomiting, I'm saying, I hit a skunk, I think, hurl, it's stuck in the undercarriage. I both kind of just backed off until we could talk again, and then he helped me poke the skunk off the bottom of my car while we both dry heaved, using his extendable baton. Nightstick? Do we still call it that? I don't know. Then once it was off, he just kind of nodded and was like, all right, good luck, kid, and got in his car. We both seemed pretty embarrassed. Whoever you were, I'm sorry you didn't get the easy arrest you thought you had, but thank you for helping me get that skunk off of my car. Story 2. Son of a cop. My dad told me about a time back in the 80s. My father was sitting in his cruiser around the corner from a bar. A car drives by, swerving a little with exhaust coming from the tailpipe, signifying a recently started vehicle. Pulls the guy over, smells alcohol on the driver while also noticing a large staff in the back seat. He has the driver step out, then inquires about the staff. The driver tells my dad, I'm a black belt in Kung Fu, I use it in class. So my father, unconvinced, asked him to demonstrate his proficiency with the staff while proving his sobriety in a sort of impromptu field sobriety test. The driver puts on a little show for my dad on the side of the road. Dad's enjoying the show but starts to hear sirens coming from all directions. Passerby had seen my dad on the side of the road in a face-off with a crazy man and a stick. Thinking my dad was in need of help, the passerby called the cops. Apparently my dad had been so wrapped up in the show, he hadn't heard the radio calls for him, so dispatch sent all available units to his rescue. Passerby thought my dad was getting his ass kicked by a ninja. Story 3. It was Brussels sprouts. I'm the guy who was doing something suspicious, but it kind of fits here. When I used to work at a grocery store, I would get off sometime between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m., and I also preferred to ride my bike most of the year to save on gas. Since work was close to my house and there were few cars out, I never really bothered with lights. Already suspicious, I know. Right around Thanksgiving, we would get in these massive stalks of Brussels sprouts, which, if you've ever seen one, they look like something you might find growing on an alien planet. A solid 3 feet of little bulbs at the end of spikes, basically. They were so super cheap that I couldn't pass up such a deal, but of course, the only way for me to transport it at home at night was to ride with the stalk sticking out a foot out of my backpack. I have no idea what the cops thought it was when they pulled me over. A weapon? I don't know. They were doing their deal where one talked to me and the other checks me out from behind when the one behind me busted out laughing. Are those Brussels sprouts? They let me go a minute later. Story 4. Police thought I murdered my ex-girlfriend and was running a can factory in my home. I'm the suspect in this situation. I lived in a large town in the south of the UK in my own terraced house. Outside of my house was a bus stop, so I had a few people who would go by outside each day, but it wasn't in the heart of the high street. I'd suffered from cluster flies for a few days and they came out of nowhere. We're talking maybe 50 or so, which is a little alarming, but there was nowhere I could see they were coming from. I got rid of them as quickly as they came about and went about my day as normal. One day in the weekend, I had a knock at the door with riot police who stated they believed that someone had died on the property and they were able to enter under an emergency act of law without a warrant. In their wisdom, they spoke to the neighbors who lived here after a report from an elderly lady visiting the bus stop. The neighbors mentioned my ex-girlfriend who they didn't see for months. We broke up and she moved out, but the police put the flies report and this fact together as me being a kid. The police were sure I had something to hide as they instantly didn't believe I owned the house. I work in IT, so I make good money and I'm thankful I saved hard to get on the housing ladder, but they weren't having any of it. I had to then wait under surveillance while my house was searched and riot police were all over the street. Now I'm a keen gardener and upstairs in the airing cupboard I was attempting to grow some from seeds. The police were convinced that 23-year-old me was instead running a cat factory. In the end, they found no dead body and they realized their mistake when I pointed out the 50 cacti around the house they conveniently didn't notice. I'm sure I'm on some kind of list now, but they left almost disappointed that their amazing detective work found an IT nerd that likes spiny flora and not the next serial killer. Story 5. Police officer here. Long story short, the guy gets locked out of his house by his wife and we catch him trying to get back into his house. It was just after midnight and we got a call about a suspicious person looking into a home. We respond to code 2, lights, no sirens, and switch off the lights before we get close to masking our approach. As we pull up to the house, we see no signs of anyone at the front of the house, so we walk around the rear and bam, the guy with the crowbar wrenching on the back door. I yell, "Police, drop the crowbar!" The dude starts screaming and nearly crying because we scared him so badly. Turns out he went to Tim Hortons to get a coffee as he and his wife had a few drinks and he forgot his keys and cell phone in the house. She was so drunk she forgot that she left him out there and locked the doors like she does every night. Poor tried to wake up his wife and she was passed out and didn't hear him. He grabbed a crowbar from his shed to try to pop the locking mechanism out and we caught him. We managed to get a hold of her by calling her on my cell. When she answered the door, she admitted to accidentally locking him out and gave us the exact sequence of events. I honestly wish we had body cams so we could replay the poor face in a high-pitched scream. Our service does not have tasers. We train constantly in advanced hand-to-hand tactics. We are getting tasers soon, though. Our hands were on our guns, but after yelling the challenge and hearing him scream and drop the crowbar, we de-escalated the situation completely. When you hear a door being wrenched on, you know there may be an improvised weapon involved. Hence, for officer safety, we were ready should he charge us. Story 6. My cousin is a cop and told us the story of seeing a car driving slowly at about 3 a.m. through a neighborhood that had several break-ins. He thinks to himself that they're looking for a target, so he puts on his lights and pulls them over. He walks up and the driver puts the window down and she turns to look at him with fire in her eyes and says in a harsh whisper, "This had better be important because I just got the baby to sleep." He looks in the back and there's a baby in a car seat, sound asleep. The memory of what it was like when his babies wouldn't sleep rushes back and he says, "Oh no, I'm so sorry, never mind," and goes back to his car. She drives away slowly. He's just glad he didn't wake the baby. Story 7. Recently, I was conducting an S18 house search on a guy we'd arrested in a local club with loads of drugs on him. In his room, I found an oversized, out-of-place vase with false flowers in them, suspicion raised. I took the flowers out, and at the bottom I saw what I believed to be a balaclava. Here we go. I took it out, unfolded it, and it turned out to be a jumper for a small dog. I look in the vase again, I see a blue velvet drawstring bag. I manipulate it slightly and it rustles with the feeling of lots of little packets inside. I remove it slowly, open the bag, and inside are some retro Scrabble pieces. The hell? We didn't find any further drugs in his room. We did, however, find a big hell-off-sized machete under his mattress wrapped up in a tea towel, so that was interesting. Still confused as hell about the contents of that vase, though. Story 8. That's easy. I'm a campus police officer and I was working the overnight shift. This, of course, means patrolling the parking lots, and from time to time you find people parked in dark spots doing various things. At the night, I turn a corner and see a car in an empty lot, so I drive up to it. As my lights pass over it, I see a guy sitting in the passenger seat, leaning back, head laid back and mouth open, and then I see what looks like a human head bobbing up and down in front of him. I've seen this before and I'm thinking someone is having a good time. Nope. Turns out it's a guy from out of state who has a kid who goes to my college and was set to graduate the next day. The head is one of the balloons he bought for her at a nearby truck stop. He was asleep and left the air on and it got caught in an air current in front of him, thus bobbing up and down. I woke him up to check on him and eventually told him what it initially looked like. His only reply was, "Yeah, I wish." Story 9. Prior U.S. Coast Guard. We were doing a security boarding on a vessel planning on entering the port with some hazardous cargo. Me and one other guy are in the engine room making sure everything is kosher when we catch a glimpse of some boots barely sticking out from under a piece of machinery. Since, as far as we knew, all crew were present and accounted for above deck, we were understandably concerned. We radio up asking about it, get told all present and accounted for up above, so we're thinking stowaway or someone being smuggled. Luckily, it was neither, just a dude who legit fell asleep while doing some maintenance. He shared a name with one of the other crew, so that's how we missed his absence. Apparently they, our guy up above, checked the same guy twice. Go fig. Story 10. At around 2 a.m. on a weeknight, I see a guy bolt from a house in a quiet residential burglary hotspot. His face is covered, he's wearing sunglasses or something similar, and the kind of dark clothing you catch burglars in. As I follow him and start to shout up on the radio, the cars parked between us clear up to reveal he's running on a leash behind the tiniest dog I've ever seen, a clearly uncontrollable pooch that's having the time of its life. I just kept going. The dog was on a leash and he was stopping to sniff at some lampposts. It wasn't dog napping. The man was running as he was trying to keep up with the dog while letting it go at the pace it wanted to. He ran from the house, but the front door was closed. The dog took off when they hit the pavement. When I got a closer look, the glasses were tinted, not sunglasses. I don't know why he had his face covered. It was a scarf and it was autumn, but we don't have sumptuary laws in our country and you can wear what you like. I'm not the fashion police. I spoke to him when I saw him later on, but I don't remember the dog's name. Sorry. It wasn't an expensive dog. It was a cheap dog. Cheap dogs have more fun, I reckon. Story 11. Cop here. Well, technically military, really. I'm an officer with the Portuguese National Republican Guard, similar to the French gendarmes. We're generally responsible for policing rural, low-population areas, though we do also take on some military and expeditionary roles like our peacekeeping presence in Timor. The point is, if you live in rural Portugal, we're the ones who are going to come when you need help or have trouble. So about 2 years ago, there was a murder. The old man was stabbed and bled out in his kitchen. The wife came home to find him dead lying on the counter. She called 112, 911 equivalent, and I was dispatched along with some colleagues. Paramedics confirmed the death on site, but we don't want to move the body before the judiciary police could have a look and do forensics. Not only that, but the old lady wasn't doing so well with the shock, so after about 20 minutes of her hyperventilating, we got her in the ambulance and paramedics took her to the hospital. That means me and my colleague were left guarding the body and trying to keep things as we found them while still looking around for evidence. About an hour later, we hear a truck arrive. My colleague goes up from the basement where we were, but I stay longer to have a better look around. Come back up 10 minutes later to find the body gone. I look outside and see two guys shoving it into the back of a non-descriptive refrigerated truck. I come out running and yelling with my gun out, thinking the murderer was back and trying to cover their tracks. My colleague steps out from behind the truck. Turns out the morgue's vehicle was broken and they were using a rental to transport the bodies. The two guys I saw were morgue workers just putting the body in the truck to carry it to the morgue, while my colleague was talking with the third. The judiciary police only came about 2 hours later. Story 12. The funniest story of mine about this stuff, years and years ago. Okay, several decades ago, so I'm old, sue me. Guy was arrested for arson. A neighbor in a subdivision backing up to the farm saw him methodically move all the valuables out of the barn over a period of a week, then closely mowed the hayfields for about 50 yards radius all around the barn. He was puzzling over the mowing when he noticed the farmer walk all around the barn, pouring something from a blue gas can right at the bottom of the barn walls. The neighbor looks away for less than a minute, and when he looks back, the barn is fully engulfed in flames. He calls the fire department and reports the farmer has set his barn on fire with gas or something. The fire department is on scene in about 5 minutes and reports the barn is already beyond saving. They do smell diesel fuel. A quick investigation says it's arson. The field is mowed to prevent spread. The burned barn has nothing much in it, but the other barn and shed overhang has a lot of stuff recently placed with grass underneath still green. Definite marks of petroleum accelerant. They arrest the farmer on the spot. He says nothing. The farmer refuses to talk to the DA and asks for his lawyer. I'm on the jury where the prosecution states they will prove the farmer set his own barn on fire. Barn was insured and insurance fraud was the motive. They call all the expected witnesses. The neighbor played the 911 call, interview with firemen who smelled fuel and saw marks of accelerant on the ground, etc. The defense does no cross-examination at all. The prosecution is done, and now it's the defense's turn. The defense calls the farmer, and the first question asked is, let's cut to the chase. Did you burn your barn down? Yep. Why did you do it? It was old and rotten with termites. Going to fall down. Not safe. Have you always burned down old farm buildings? Yep, and my daddy did before me. It's a farm. Are you aware that you need a permit to burn debris in this county? Been doing it like that on this farm since we had dangerous engines. Never had any permit. The fine is up to $50. Oh wait, I forgot. You've zoned active agriculture and are exempt. No permit is needed. But why didn't you tell any of this to the police? They didn't ask till after they put handcuffs on me and took me to the police station. They told me anything I said would be used against me and said I had the right to remain silent, and then some lawyer guy came in and told me I was going to prison for insurance fraud. I remember Perry Mason said, don't talk to anyone but your lawyer, so I didn't. Did you file an insurance claim? What for? The barn wasn't worth anything in the state and I moved all the stuff out. I suggested we try to talk them out of this. You said you wanted your day in court. What's up with that? They came on my land, arrested me without telling me what for, told me later it was for arson and insurance fraud and put that in the newspapers. All my friends, relatives, and neighbors know about this. They made me look dishonest. I want to make sure everyone knows the real facts. I figure this is better than them just dropping it and everyone wondering whether they just decided not to send an old man to prison. Defense rests. It was epic. The jury was sent out of the room and after a few minutes told the case was over and to go back to the waiting room in case we were needed for the next trial. It's my understanding they dropped the case. Story 13. I was on the bus commuting to my university and began to feel extremely bloated, so I decided to get off. Turns out it was a relatively good move because as soon as I got off the bus, I began furiously crapping myself. And I mean like full-on blasting diarrhea. Of course, it didn't really help me avoid crapping myself, but it helped me not embarrass myself by turning the bus into an bomb that day. I didn't give the full story as what happened thereafter. It was probably even more embarrassing than pooping myself. Anyway, after the story above happened, I found myself in the middle of downtown area of my city, a place with which I was not familiar. However, luckily I had my phone, so I turned on my location and tried to figure out where I was. Thankfully, I found out that I was really close to the Natural History Museum that I visited quite frequently. So I get there and decide to stand on the side of the building where there is a small round area with stone benches. I call my parents and after having a few laughs, they agree to pick me up. However, I'm like 45 minutes away from my house, so it's going to take a while. What I didn't expect is that people were frequently walking past me. Apparently, they found me suspicious. They apparently couldn't smell the radiating stench of poop filling the area and decided to inform the cops that I was there, who said people thought I was waiting for a drug deal. This forced me to admit that I did indeed crap my pants, and after they came closer, I think they realized it and didn't want to go towards the front of the museum where there were a lot of people. Needless to say, I was embarrassed. The cop politely asked if I needed a ride home or a phone to call someone on, and I assured them that someone was coming to get me, and they left. And there you have it, the most embarrassing moment of my life. Story 14. Not a cop, but I am reminded of a story. When he was 16 or so, my brother and his friends would do some absolutely stupid things. One day, they were walking through the local grocery store and saw that cases of teenies, also called hugs, lil jugs, and quarter waters, were on sale at a huge discount. They decided to have a teenies drinking contest and bought several cases. So there they are in the parking lot of a Stop and Shop. They have the cases stacked in the open trunk of a car and have formed into a circle where they are now cheering the combatants on as two people at a time try to chug the most teenies in a 2-minute match. Kids two-fisting teeny jugs, breaking foil caps and pounding these juices and then crushing the plastic jugs on their foreheads and throwing them on the ground and going for the next juice. And during this idiocy, a cop car pulls up. The cop gets out and sees a group of teenage boys crushing plastic jugs of something, screaming like idiots. Several kids have puked red and purple colored liquid on the parking lot. He obviously thinks they have booze and starts giving them the riot act. At this point, the officer is informed that the kids have no booze on them, that all they have is juice, and that they were all overcome with thirst. The police officer eventually realized they were telling the sort of truth and ordered them to all clean up their mess and then head home. Story 15. I was on the other side of it. I was driving around my neighborhood at around 11 p.m., really slow looking for my lost doggo. I'd worked the next day, so I went home and went to bed. About 30 minutes later, 5 cop cars pull up at the house and ask to speak to me. So naturally, I'm pissed and asked why they're there. She said we had multiple cars about your car driving slowly through the neighborhood, blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you, so is that illegal? Was not the right thing to say. The cop gets super mad and goes on and on about how suspicious it was. Finally, I told her I was looking for my dog and she said, "Oh," and turns around and walks away. It was silly. Am I really going to scope out houses down the street from where I live? The dog came back the next morning, happy and full of trash. She is a lab who eats everything.
Cops of Reddit. A lot of people get jumpy and try to act normal around law enforcement. How can you tell genuinely suspicious people from self-conscious idiots acting weird? Story 1. UK police officer here. There is no single factor, but here are a few things I'd look for. Police aware is an expression we use. As the thread said, most people feel guilty and try to act normal around the police, which normally means pretending we're not there. So for example, you begin to concentrate on eating that sandwich to an almost comic extent while sneaking the odd look to see what we're doing. Then you have the people who stop what they're doing and watch you intently to see if you're coming for them. These are the people who are police aware. Of course, sometimes they're just tourists hoping to take a sneaky photo of a British copper. Mostly it's people whose appearance or manner doesn't fit in. For example, if you go to a busy taxi rank at rush hour and then just casually mooch about rather than queuing or leaving, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into an expensive shop wearing tatty clothes and with ingrained dirt on your hands, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into a bar, order a drink, then leave it on the counter, then that's odd and probably means you're either passing counterfeit money or pickpocketing. None of these things is illegal, but they're all things that are not entirely normal and would attract the eye of an observant police officer. Don't misinterpret these examples as looking scruffy. That's not what I mean at all. It's about not fitting in because of your context, not just a sudden bout of "I'm normal" from someone who clearly has a reason to be where they are. Visible signs of drug use. Sometimes in the UK you'll hear the term heroin diet, but the same would be true for meth in the US. You can spot addicts from a mile away because they have the same look and behaviors. Without wishing to tar all addicts with the same brush, hard drug addiction and acquisitive crime often go hand in hand, so when I see someone who is clearly an addict, I'm immediately interested in them. Lastly, there's intelligence. A lot of what we do is guided by specific knowledge about an area. In some areas, I'll be looking out for teenage kids hanging around bike racks, and in others, I'll be looking out for drug addicts meeting dealers. In others still, I'll be looking for bag thieves amongst drinkers. Anyone who matches the sort of person I'm on the lookout for, who also looks jumpy, is going to pique my interest, but normal people, less so. Sorry, it's such a rambling answer. The truth is, there are many factors, and it just depends. Story 2. I got pulled over for speeding on Canada Day on my way up to Ottawa from Toronto. I did the usual routine of pulling over somewhere safe, taking the registration out, and putting both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. So the cop approaches and I ask if it's okay for me to reach over and turn down the music, which I forgot to do. He starts laughing and says okay. He tells me to put my hands down since I'm making him nervous. I'm like, "You're making me nervous." And then back in Toronto, I don't take any chances and the cops are usually appreciative. But they have never told me to relax. It's best to err on the side of caution with Toronto police. But the out-of-city cops are usually pretty laid back. We had a good old Canadian laugh and wished each other a happy Canada Day, and then he gave me a ticket for 115 and a 100. Sigh. Edit. I was caught going 125 kilometers per hour in a 100 kilometer per hour zone. The cop reduced it to 115 kilometers per hour. Story 3. Cop here. I'll give a serious answer instead of all the others. Assuming this is on a traffic stop, for the most part, if you're acting jumpy, I try to figure out why and remove that stress. If I can't figure it out on my own, I'll just simply ask. Common answers are, I don't like cops, I don't want a ticket, and so on. My reasoning for this is if you're relaxed and I ask if there are any weapons in the car and your stress indicators skyrocket when you say no, something is wrong. If you're already stressed, I won't be able to see that reaction. As others have stated, it's not 100%. Some people are just nervous Nellies. I try to calm people down for their sanity and my safety, but it doesn't always work. Story 4. Police instructor here. You look for what is out of place or context. If everyone is looking at an event or a certain direction, that one person is staring at you or in the completely opposite direction, that's the oddball. People draw attention to themselves by behavior that is different from the environment or expected of the environment that they are in. And that's how they identified the Boston bombers. Everyone was looking in the direction of the explosion, but the brothers were staring in the opposite direction. suspicious behavior. This technique can be applied to clothing as well. Like if it's summer and you see people wearing heavy jackets, there's something odd. Somebody keeps tapping their waistline and there's no reason for him to do that, like something falling off of it, and there's something tucked in their waistline, like drugs or weapons. Now, not saying that this gives you an excuse to go up and start harassing people, however, it definitely lets you narrow down the focus of your attention for what's out of place. Story 5. The funny thing is, if I'm off duty and around a uniformed officer I don't know, different department, area, etc., I get nervous. Hell, my heart sometimes skips a beat when I see one of our own cars driving down the road, even though it may be the same exact vehicle I was assigned to just a few hours ago. My point is, I think pretty much everyone gets nervous around a cop. Most people will avoid you and not make eye contact. But what really stands out for me are the adults that will periodically look at you, or you feel them staring at you like they're trying to ID your face. I've had to arrest a lot of people over the years, and many of them are back out on the streets. Story 6. Cops once woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning because my neighbor saw flashlights in the woods next to my house. And then they started questioning me, asking me why I seemed so nervous, and if I wasn't doing anything, why were there footprints in the snow in front of my front door? I was a 19-year-old kid living on my own in a small town, so small it didn't have a population. I just remember being absolutely flabbergasted at why they would want to know why someone might be nervous about getting a visit from the cops in the middle of the night, and why they thought footprints in a heavily traveled area were suspicious. I basically told them some variation of that, and then told them they were welcome to look around outside if they wanted to before they left. This was during deer hunting season in Wisconsin, so the only thing I could think of is maybe they thought there was some poaching going on. Still, it showed a remarkable detachment from reality that they couldn't understand why I was so nervous to begin with. Story 7. Random story. So not long after I got my license, I was driving around and at a stoplight, there was a cop behind me. I hadn't done anything wrong. Cops at that point didn't freak me out yet, and even I knew a kid in school who was planning to become one. So the light turns green and I go. When I look behind, everyone is behind the cop in all lanes. It weirded me out. Usually there are cars passing me or next to me. People were giving the cop a nice wide berth, or at least not wanting to drive ahead of it. It made me feel paranoid, and I checked my speed. I was actually going slower than the speed limit. After I figured out everyone was just being paranoid, I sped up to the speed limit, and that was that. The cop was driving slower than the speed limit, and I drove off, leaving them all behind. I feel like the cop probably thought it was hilarious that his presence was slowing down traffic, because it wasn't like he was trying to control it. And since then, I've had plenty of speeding tickets. Plenty. But not on that day. Cops freak me out now too. Every time I see one, I go, oh speed limit? Okay. Car functioning right? Yes. Drugs in the car? Wait, I don't do drugs. It's a pretty tense situation. Story 8. I'm an ex-cop, still licensed, if that matters. You can't always tell. That is why treating everyone as close to the same as possible is important. The average person will change their behavior around a police officer at least a little bit. Can be a weird, over-respectful type of deal, or they may shut down completely. The average criminal acts nearly the same. However, that is why it's important to be very aware of the person's movements and responses to questions or your own movements. If you ask a person with drugs in the car, do you have drugs in the car? His eyes will very commonly dart towards where he or she is hiding something, even if it is not drugs. That, of course, does not give me probable cause to tear the car apart looking for stuff. It's just a red flag. A person who is simply nervous and is not really guilty of a crime will most likely just break eye contact and look somewhere, such as out the window, behind you, down at the wheel, etc. The same goes for a person you may simply be suspicious of on the street. Are you carrying any weapons? Will lead to a person carrying a weapon too often, touching the area where it is, usually repeatedly, or start to look at where they have hidden a weapon. A person who is just nervous probably won't grab their waistband several times after that question. That is just one example, but it shows the importance of communication. Being aware of the surroundings and subject and why asking questions is very important. All because a person who is simply nervous and a criminal who is nervous are almost indistinguishable without some digging. As for people who appear totally 100% calm, well, that in and of itself can be a red flag as well. Maybe he or she is calm because they like police, or maybe they are police in a different area. Maybe they really do simply have nothing to hide and a good understanding of police procedures, or they are a hardened criminal that has no sense of remorse or anxiety over meeting a cop. You never know unless you start to look deeper. So to anyone who feels like cops hate you or are mean, maybe that sheds a bit of light on things. Story 9. Great question. I'm a cop in Arizona, and it's important to know the cultural and societal norms of your patrol area. A huge amount of folks here carry guns, for example. Your average law-abiding citizen will generally use a holster and not be deceptive about the weapon. Bad guys will not be forthcoming. We have some issues with Mexican drug cartels, and they tend to blend in somewhat, but have guns in unique calibers, such as a .38 Super. Since we do have a huge Hispanic community, it helps to know the norms for their behavior, which differs somewhat from the white community. A vast majority of the time, we will be dealing with people while investigating specific crimes. There's a huge variety of factors involved in that, but generally speaking, you are going to use 4 of your senses to make educated guesses: sight, smell, touch, sound. A person whose voice wavers may just be afraid of cops. Combine that with an odor of drugs or a suspicious protrusion on their body, then there could be an issue. While cultural knowledge is important, there are some universal signs of deception which you would probably recognize. I spent a year in Afghanistan doing police work as well, and those principles held true there too. To a degree, it's profiling, which is a dirty word, but a pragmatic principle. Story 10. Not a cop, but was almost arrested in my buddy's backyard. I was with 3 of my friends at a bar, and we were all getting pretty drunk and having a good time. My one buddy got too drunk, and he says he is heading home, where we all are staying that night, and that he will just leave the door unlocked for us to come in when we get back. Well, he ends up going to his dad's house instead of his mom's house, as we thought, and he isn't answering his phone. We are already in his mom's backyard and looking in his window, trying to see if he is in his room. His mom wakes up and calls the police, and we still don't know anything is wrong. Cops come over and we hear them in the alley, but think it's our buddy or his brother getting home, so we go up to the gate to ask them to let us into the house. A cop jumps over the fence and knees my buddy in the back and starts screaming at us to get the fuck on the ground. I was terrified and got on the ground, and all of us were so panicked that we started stuttering out, "Please, we know the people who live here, it's our buddy's mother's place," and start saying the full names of everyone who lived there. The cop responded to this by saying, "Bullshit, you guys are going to fucking jail, nobody lives here, it's an empty house." The cops then ask us if we have any weapons. Knives, guns, batons, hand grenades was the exact quote, I believe. At this point, we're all still so panicked and stressed, and I'm thinking that I'm going to jail and there won't be a chance to explain myself, and my buddies and I are just trying to assure the cop that we have no weapons and that we are good people. So we're just sputtering out our summer jobs, saying we aren't criminals, and telling the cops we are in university and are good guys. Finally, the cops ask for our IDs, and I'm so scared of getting tasered or shot for reaching into my pockets. I must have announced what I was reaching for about 10 times before actually doing it really, really slowly. The cops check our IDs and we're all still lying on the ground. Then they turn to us and go, "Yeah, you all are going to jail for the night. Nice try." Then they get on the phone, and I guess they called my friend's mom saying it was safe to come outside and if she wanted to talk to them or see who was trying to break in. Thank God she chose to come outside because she knew us really well and recognized us all from closer up, even in the dark. So she walks out of the door and my buddy starts shouting, Miss Henderson, it's us, Charlie and Buddy." And we were saved from jail that night. The weird part was that before that, I actually thought that cops had some magical training to be able to tell when people were lying or good or bad. After that night, I realized it is just based on the situation and their best guess. Nothing we could have said or done would have changed that we were in someone else's backyard and that they had called the cops. It makes sense we were treated like criminals and potentially dangerous criminals too. The cops had no good reason why they should think of us as anything but. Story 11. Homicide detective here. Nervousness is not a sign of guilt, it's a sign of nervousness. Everyone responds to different situations differently, and some people get nervous around cops no matter how innocent or guilty they feel. I've watched other cops argue the point that a suspect must be guilty based on their nervous behavior, so I know some cops actually think that way. I think it's usually newer officers, stupid officers, or officers who have less experience dealing with people who think it's a good idea to link nervousness with guilt. I wish I knew a way to teach other cops that nervousness is a poor indicator of guilt and should never be included in forming suspicion. But every cop is an individual human being with human flaws and personal opinions. One of the shittiest things about this job is watching some cops just be bad at their job. Story 12. Always struggled with anxiety in social situations. Made meeting girls difficult. At age 26, I decided to try my hand at online dating. Bought a premium account on Cupid.com. Met a girl who was amazing. We chatted online for 3 months before I worked up the nerve to meet her face to face. My family wished me luck as I headed out. On the way up to the interstate, there's a sign that says there's an ID stop 1 mile ahead. So I think to myself, no big deal, this is my exit. And I pull off onto the exit that is about 100 yards behind the sign. They were clearly expecting bad guys to pull off into that exit because ahead of me were 12 to 14 police cars, several of which were K9 units. I slow to a stop and I roll my window down. The officer asks for my ID and where I'm heading. I say, I'm actually heading out to meet a girl. And he replies, oh, really? Yeah, we've been talking on the internet for a few months and I'm finally going to meet her. The officer smiles and says, I was wondering why you were so shaky when you handed me your ID. Another officer walks over to see what's going on. The first officer says, hey, this guy's about to go on a first date. He's nervous. The second officer jokingly says, well, if he's nervous, he may be hiding something. The first officer laughs, pats the door frame, hands me back my ID and says, you're going to have fun. Good luck. The situation made a great icebreaker upon meeting my online crush. We enjoyed our evening and hit it off. That was 12 years ago, and we've been married for 10 of those. Story 13. Real cop here. Worked in Philly for 6 years in Kensington, and now I'm in the burbs living on Easy Street. When I was in Philly, you needed to learn people's ways. You would patrol the area multiple times, and you would notice that some people just never left. Also, you'll notice that these same people would be out regardless of the weather. Anyway, it took a while at first, but with time, you start to find out who's a dealer and who isn't. Drug dealers were annoying to get in Philly because they had a ton of lookouts blocks away, and they never kept the drugs on them. I remember we would drive early Sunday mornings the wrong way to get the jump on people. Stolen cars were a little easier. I probably got about 20 plus stolen vehicles in Philadelphia in the last 2 years I was there. People in stolen cars tend to give an oh shit look. Another dead giveaway is when you have a ton of young kids in a car. Seriously, it's a stolen car a ton of times in the hood. 2 weeks before I left, I was working solo and I saw 4 kids in a Sonata Park on the side. By the time I turned around, they were on the move. I caught up to the car and they quickly took off. Long story short, it was stolen. Some people were really good at getting guns. They were able to read people's stances and notice that they walked in a different manner when someone had a weapon on their waistband. I was never too good at that and only maybe got a dozen and a half guns while I worked in Philly. Now, working in the burbs, it's a lot less hectic. I get paid more and literally do about 1/20th of the amount of work. To me, it seems unfair, but whatever. I still enjoy my job, but if I had to pick where to work, I would pick Philly. It feels like real police work. But it is nice in the burbs that I can interact with the community more. Story 14. So a funny story that happened to me a couple of days ago. Driving my hour commute at 5 in the morning down a highway with a speed limit of 70. Barely anyone on the road. I'm in no rush, so I'm cruising along at like 72, 73 in the left lane. And then I look back and suddenly there's a car literally on my ass. Like he was so close, I couldn't see his headlights. And it's not like I drive a big car, just a normal size sedan. Normally, I'm not one to let people who do that by me, but hey, I was in a decent enough mood. I'll pull over for him and then just follow along behind him at whatever speed he's going. So I let him pass, and to my surprise, it was a cop. I'm like, okay, that's rude and dangerous and not becoming of a police officer. Whatever. I get back behind him and fiddle with the cruise control so that I'm following him maybe 5 to 6 car lengths. Matching his speed, we're going about 85. Continue along like this for 20 to 30 minutes. Suddenly, he guns it and then turns off all of his lights. My first reaction was, okay, why would he do that? But the second was, okay, crap, I can't see him anymore. Like, it's 5:30 in the morning and still pitch black. So I slow down back to 70 or so because I don't want to run into him or have him run into a different car and be part of the collateral. I don't know, it was just really dangerous, I thought. So after a couple of minutes, he turns his headlights back on, zooms back up to like 85, and starts riding my ass again. Now, I'm just royally confused and I put my turn signal on to move over. Then the flashing lights and pulls me over. I'm pissed now because I don't know how long he's going to take and I might be late for work. He comes and asks me why I was following him. I'm thinking to myself like, it's a highway, we're going straight. I go, I was just driving behind you. He goes, I had my cruise control at 85. Why were you keeping up with me? I just told him I was driving along with the speed of the car in front of me. Then he's like, I turned my lights off and slowed down to 60 and you slowed down too. Why? First, because I didn't want to pass the cop. That's just asking for it. But 2, because I couldn't see you and I didn't want to hit you. What you did was really dangerous. He gets all pissed and runs my shit and starts giving me a lecture that I have to slow down and all this bull. It pissed me off that he didn't see the hypocrisy. Unless they are on a call or have their lights on, cops have to follow the same laws as everyone else. No ticket, but I was this close to calling the dispatcher and filing a complaint for his speed.
Police officers. What absurd situation have you just happened upon and realized no one called the cops? I used to be a police officer, and one night after my late shift, I was driving home and decided to stop for breakfast at Waffle House. As I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared with an auto repair shop, I noticed some people waving at me. I pointed to the back of the lot, so I parked my car and turned on my spotlight. Behind the fence at the back of the repair shop, there was a dumpster, and next to it, I could see the feet of a man. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and passed right by my car on his way to Waffle House. I walked over to the man, but he didn't respond when I tried to talk to him. I called for help, and when the emergency medical team arrived, they found that the man had already passed. To this day, I still don't know how or why he passed away. The homeless man was waiting for me near Waffle House, and when I asked him what had happened, he said, "He was out cold, so I was pouring water on him to keep him warm." The video from the auto shop showed the man walking and then collapsing next to the dumpster. It wasn't hurt or anything, so it could have been a medical emergency or something else. For 45 minutes, the homeless man kept going back to a water hose near Waffle House, filling a bowl with cold faucet water and pouring it on the man because it was a bit chilly outside and he didn't want him to get too cold. Nothing in my entire career ever came close to the strangeness of that night. Is it just me, or does something weird always seem to go down at Waffle House? Story 2. I'm not a police officer, I'm a paramedic, but I think this story fits. My partner and I were at our post, which was in the parking lot of a mall with several stores and one bar that was known to be a bit shady. The partner was taking a short nap. It was around 1 a.m., while I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. After a while, I noticed a few people coming out of the bar and just hanging around in the parking lot. More people came out and they all just stood there. I went back to my movie, and 20 minutes later, I saw that the group outside the bar had grown much larger. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was odd that they all had been there for so long, so I decided to take a closer look. I woke up my grumpy partner and asked him to drive our ambulance closer to the group. As we approached with our lights on, the group noticed us and started to split up. Some people ran away, and I saw that in the middle of the group there was a person. My partner and I jumped out and asked what was going on. Someone from the group said, "This guy is just hammered. He stumbled out here and fell asleep." I called out to the man on the ground, but he didn't respond. I checked for a pulse, and there wasn't one. I started CPR while my partner got our medical bag and called dispatch. For 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this guy, and none of them did anything about it. There wasn't even any noticeable panic. Nobody asked if he needed help or called anyone, and they probably never would have. The man was already cold by the time we reached him, meaning he had been lying there for at least 30 minutes. We did everything we could, but there was no saving him. We took him to the hospital, and he was pronounced departed within 15 minutes of arriving. How hard is it to ask someone if they're okay? Or to call 911? How could not one single person in that group be alarmed by seeing a man sleeping in a parking lot? I've had similar situations happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't seem to care. Story 3. 3 weeks after I started my job as a police officer, I was on my way to our off-site property control. I was driving through a residential area to avoid traffic and to get a look at my new patrol area. As I drove past a house, I saw smoke pouring out from under the roof and 2 men watching from across the street. They pointed at the house as I stopped and said, "I think there's a fire." Their "think" was an understatement. The whole house was filled with smoke and there had been no call for help. These 2 men were just chatting and not doing anything. I couldn't see any flames, but it was July 10th, a sunny morning, so there was no mistaking a house fire in broad daylight. I called it in and tried to get into the house to check for anyone. I want to make it clear that I had no fire training, but I knew that if there were anyone inside, I wouldn't be much help and would just be another to rescue once the fire department arrived. I got into the backyard by jumping over the hood of a minivan and sliding across it like the Duke brothers from the TV show because there was so much junk everywhere. This action broke a piece of the wooden fence and jammed my radio key button open, so everyone could hear me breathing, yelling for anyone, and so on. I didn't know at the time that my mic was open. I lay down on the deck and looked through the sliding glass door, but I could only see about 4 inches above the floor because of the smoke. I kept yelling for anyone, but there was no response. As soon as the fire department arrived, they made a slow entry because the front door had been barricaded. That's when I knew something wasn't right. My suspicions were confirmed when firefighters brought out a family. The father was the last one taken out and the only survivor. Story 4. I'm not in law enforcement anymore, but I worked in it for about 12 years in a big city. When I was a patrol officer, I got a call about someone setting off fireworks in a mall at 2 a.m. These kinds of calls were common, so we would usually go check the area and then clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but I noticed that the lights were on in one of the businesses in the mall. I won't say which business it was, but it was owned by a well-known local businessman. Anyway, I got out to check and found the front door unlocked, which seemed strange. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call someone from the business. As I was checking the building, I found the owner and several other important people in the back room where there was a poker table set up. One of the guys was sitting down with a pile of coats in his lap, which was really odd, and he was acting like he was in pain. I then asked him what was wrong. He started to cry and move the coats, revealing that he had a wound. To make a long story short, these guys had a high-stakes poker game every week, and someone tried to rob it, and things went wrong. The people involved in the game didn't want to call the police and were planning to have a doctor come and treat him secretly. Playing is against the law in the state where I worked, but we honestly wouldn't have cared much. We actually caught the guy who did it, but the district attorney wouldn't prosecute because the guys didn't want to testify or get involved. The guy recovered just fine. One of the guys I interviewed told me that they were robbed of over $30,000. Story 5. There have been so many absurd situations where people didn't call the police or 911. But the most ridiculous one was when my neighbors across the street had a medical emergency with their father-in-law right in their front lawn during a barbecue. The guy's son was having a huge tantrum. He was screaming, "Please God, don't take my dad." The other relatives just watched the spectacle, forming a semicircle around the father-in-law. I finally looked out my window, opened it, and shouted to ask if anyone had called 911. I got about 20 blank stares in response, so I called for them. And when the paramedics arrived, the crazy son tried to stop them as they were loading his dad into the ambulance. I had to call the cops for them, too. It seems like common sense isn't really all that common. I can just imagine their conversation from all the panic be like, "Hey, call 911. What's the number?" Story 6. I started my shift from 4 in the afternoon until midnight by heading straight to get a coffee. It was a beautiful summer day with people all around. I parked my car and saw a man in front of a park bench. I quickly got out of my police car, grabbed my first aid bag, and reported the situation. The man was awake but not really able to respond. It might sound like a scene from a movie, but we were actually doing the blink if you can hear me thing to communicate. The emergency medical team finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I later learned that the poor man had a severe medical emergency and was still in a bad state when I found him. The part that frustrates me was seeing the many people walking around who couldn't even take the time to call 911, let alone check if the guy was okay. Story 7. I patrol on a mountain bike in a city that's not too small and not too big. One morning, just after the rush hour, I was riding and spotted a kid standing on the side of the road with no parents around. We stopped to ask him where his parents were, but he just shrugged. I reported it, and a man ran out of some townhomes across the street. He said the boy had been standing there for a few hours and he had been watching him to keep an eye on him. There were other people around, but we never got a call about it. To make a long story short, the boy had wandered out of the room where he and his mom were staying nearby and ended up on the street. The place was a shelter for women. He managed to get past the manager and a court police officer. His mom had passed away 3 days before, and when he got hungry, he left the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on them. Story 8. Obligatory, not a police officer, but I am an EMT, emergency medical technician. One day, we were waiting at a traffic light on our way back to the station, marking the end of our shift. We saw a man running incredibly fast across a crosswalk, trying to cross before the light turned red, and a woman chasing after him. My partner and I looked at each other and he said, "She's going to be in an accident." Sure enough, something did happen. We immediately turned on our emergency lights and jumped out of the ambulance. When we reached the woman, she was unconscious. The partner, who's a paramedic, started his assessment while I went to get a backboard, a cervical collar, and called it in to dispatch. She woke up and immediately started screaming about her boyfriend leaving her. She tried to stand up and run after him, but fell. We finally calmed her down, though she wouldn't listen and kept trying to walk. Once we had her in the back of the ambulance and out of the road, into a nearby parking lot, the driver who approached us. By now, firefighters were on the scene, asking what was going on. We explained the situation, and my partner told them we could handle it, so they left, looking confused and a bit uneasy. We talked to the woman for a while, insisting she needed to go to the hospital, but she kept saying she couldn't go and had to find her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the driver was apologizing to me and saying she wanted to help in any way she could. The woman kept refusing to go to the hospital. After we cleaned her up, she asked if we could take her to her boyfriend's house. As an EMT, I can either take you to the hospital or leave you where you are. She refused transport so much that my partner and I told her we couldn't take her anywhere else. Then she got out of the ambulance and asked the driver if she would take her to her boyfriend's house if she didn't call the police. Before we could even radio in that the patient was refusing transport to the hospital, she was driving away in the car. Story 9. Real and current cop here. One morning as I was going home, a frantic lady with several kids in her car waved me down. She told me there was a device planted outside her garage. I asked her to wait somewhere safe while I checked out her place. When I got there, I found a fire extinguisher with a Coke bottle duct taped to it. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the Coke bottle was destroyed and probably filled with dry ice. I suspected it might have been a prank by our kids' friends. Another time I was patrolling a neighborhood I had never been through before, just by random choice as I passed by. I saw someone run across the roadway, so I chased the guy to a playground where he tried to hide in the sand. He confessed that he was a minister for some small church. He was arrested that night, and when I called the church in the morning, they didn't seem to care. I posted about it on Facebook and linked the public records from the courthouse as proof, and the local news had a field day with the story. Once I was flagged down by a person who seemed to have a medical problem. He claimed he had been taken by aliens and had no identification on him. He was in a panic, so the rescue team checked him out. He told them the same story, but his information didn't show up in the state's motor vehicle department or any of our reports. While he was in the van, another officer arrived with a fingerprint scanner, but we found out that he wasn't in any database we had access to. We assumed he might have just been on something. He gave me an address to tell his family which hospital he would be at and described the cars in the driveway. It was across town, so I stopped by hours later on my way home. The cars he described were there, but when I knocked on the door, the people had no idea who he was. I described him and everything, but they didn't recognize him. I just left and never saw him again. I had to help the county with calls one night because they had a major incident. I'm not used to taking calls without addresses. One call had directions like, turn right at the barn, go past the rusted truck, etc. I followed the directions to contact a person about a simple theft that occurred at their work or something. I went to the wrong house and interrupted a barbecue at 2 a.m. One night I heard screaming from a parking lot. I saw a man and a woman. I observed for a moment before intervening. The woman was definitely the one who was starting it all, while the male was backing away and telling her to stop, but she was yelling for help and for someone to call the police. Well, here I am. I arrested her for what she did. I guarantee that if people had called the police for her, they would have given me false testimony saying, yeah, she was the one needing help, blah blah. I'm glad I witnessed it myself. On my way to the jail outside of the city one night, I saw 3 pickup trucks on the side of the road. I drove closer and was surprised. About 5 guys stood on the side of the road looking into a ravine. I could have sworn they were doing something bad. I honked my air horn from afar, ready to speed out of there since I had a prisoner who was my responsibility. The guys all walked to the road. I got out but felt like they were respecting me at this point. One guy approached. As he did, I heard cries coming from the ravine. He told me one of their cows had gone loose and fallen into the ravine. It had been there for a few days before they found it. They nodded and blocked traffic while they put the poor animal down. I was called to a hotel to check in a room that was getting frequent unregistered guests. The manager had done some Googling of the registered person's name. It was a college girl, pleasant-looking, well-mannered, and a Facebook page with a nice-looking family. She had a back-page listing for a service and was in college for biology. She drove a brand-new Tacoma, TRD, mind you. The manager wanted me to remove any other guests in the room. I knocked on the door and she answered. I explained the manager's suspicions. She laughed and said she was from out of town, just visiting a friend, and he had come over a few times to say hi. She allowed me to do a quick look inside her room for guests. When I came out of the bathroom, I noticed she'd closed the door. She said something like, "Can you stay and chat a while?" I can't remember exactly what she said because this was back in 2013, 2014. I declined and left. I've also been through really terrible scenes. Some of them were on national news. It's not all fun and games, but I live for the happy moments, the fun times in the job, the people whose lives I actually save, the smiles and handshakes. There have been quite a few people who are here because of me. I know if it wasn't me, it would be another cop from my department. But still, it was me, and it makes me smile. Story 10. During my first year as a police officer, I was patrolling an area near a big Midwestern college where there were a lot of group houses. It was a Friday night during a football weekend, so we were keeping a close eye for any parties that might get out of hand. We drove onto a small block with a narrow street, and there we saw something crazy. No fewer than 5 people were doing drink stands right in the middle of the road at the same time. Several neighbors were watching from their windows with annoyed expressions, but it was clear that none of them had bothered to call us. It was a good thing we showed up when we did because there were several guys who had passed out and needed medical help right away. But that's not the end of the story. Out of the several arrests I made that night for being intoxicated, one of them was the daughter of one of my dad's best friends. They had been roommates at the same college many years ago. That arrest, which wasn't her first, led to her being moved out of the college. Somehow my dad found out that I was the officer who had stopped by and made the arrest. When I went to my parents' house for dinner next week, my dad greeted me by scolding me. Story 11. Not a cop. I was the guy they walked up on. I wasn't doing anything worthy of calling the cops, but I guess it was questionable enough to take a quick detour to. So I'll start by saying I used to live in California. And Fresno was one of the places I lived at. This had to be back in '06 or so. At the apartments I lived at, I never really had many issues, but I guess further in at the back of the complex in those buildings, some shady stuff was going on. At least once a month, a police copter was hovering over this place, spotlighting the area, and I never really knew why until much later. I moved into a unit in their sister complex in '08 and got to talking with a head maintenance worker in charge of both places and got the beans spilled. So anyways, the last of those Star Wars prequels had come out on DVD still somewhat recently, and for some reason, one of my buddies thought it would be cool and fun to choreograph lightsaber play, just because we were silly nerds. Figured if we got some moves down, we'd spend some cash on some good prop lightsabers to play with. But we basically used sticks he ordered up. Actually, come to think of it, our first version was a couple dowels and a small 5-inch long or so pipe at the bottom for the handle and counterweight, but those broke quickly, and he found the sticks online that were more durable and meant for what we were planning and holding up. So usually we'd end up doing this. Just about, playing with these sticks like total nerds and choreographing up those moves we'd follow. We happened to be doing this in a police helicopter night, and finally they spotted us with these sticks. Spotlight lands on us. We stop, look up, give a little wave. Spotlight doesn't move. I look at my buddy. He looks at me. I shrug. Don't mind it. We're not doing anything bad. We go back into it. A minute later, there came about 4 or 5 officers, all in tactical gear. They were holding them pretty casually, but I guess they got sent to see what we were doing or if they happened to come across something during their call. They asked us what we were doing, and saying we were practicing lightsaber moves sounded pretty dumb, so we told them we were practicing for a play. Pretty much dropped it at that. They asked me where a building number was and told us we should probably go inside for the night. And off they went. My favorite part of this is that the spotlight landed on them and their first instinct was to wave at the helicopter. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 12. Police officer in a very wealthy rural area. People out walking at night is not typically normal. We usually just stop, say hi, and ask if they need anything, then go on our way. One rainy night, I was driving down one of our busier roads, still in the middle of nowhere, and saw a male just running. He was clearly not exercising, so I stopped and asked him if he was okay. I asked if he wanted to ride somewhere so he could get out of the rain. He said he had gone into an argument with his parents and was running to his friend's house. He was acting strange, and it seemed that he was hiding something. I decided it was best to take him where he was going and hopefully speak with an adult who could explain further. He said that was fine and that his friend's parents could explain, so he hops in and we go. Sure enough, I pull into the driveway and look up into the window. I see a group of teenagers. They see my police car and give me the uh-oh look, put down the blinds and start going everywhere. I realized this was a party and said to the kid, "Dude, why did you just have me drive you here?" He then realized what he had just done and he turned very red. Turns out his argument with his parents was because they didn't want him going to this party and he just ran out of his house. He could have told me to take him home, to Wendy's, anywhere but there, and I would have gladly done it. Story 13. So I'm not a cop, but one time, I was driving home from work after a long day of severe thunderstorms in Kansas City. I was on the highway, lots of traffic in front of me, hardly anyone behind me. Everyone was moving to the right lane, and I quickly saw 2 cars in the shoulder and car parts all over the slow lane. Not a single person even slowed down. I pulled over and checked the car in front. It was empty. I checked the second, and the driver was hammered, but otherwise all right. He said it happened 10 minutes prior, and I was the first to stop, but please don't call the cops. I wasn't interested in his request and called anyway. After I said the driver reported he had no injuries but appeared intoxicated, the 911 dispatcher put me on hold. She came back on, said all first responders were busy with flood rescues and they dispatched police in a tow when they could, and would I stay at the scene. After about 25 minutes sitting there, the driver walked over and asked me if I'd drive him home. I said he'd get a leaving the scene. He just said, "Man, if they arrest me for leaving the scene sometime tomorrow, they won't arrest me for DUI. They got my car and my plate, they'll know where to find me." Dude got a ride, I went home. Cops never called back for a follow-up. Story 14. Not a cop, but one experience I had was when my friends and I were driving to Dunkin' Donuts during our lunch period in the Bronx. About 2 blocks away from school, we see a white sedan and an SUV next to each other, one of them blocking the road and facing the wrong way. I stop and wait because I don't have anywhere to go. Sedan in the wrong lane speeds up, swerves out of the way of my car and parks it up in the spot next to me on the other side of the street. The SUV starts coming down the lane and a guy gets out of the sedan with a baseball bat and hand swings into the speeding SUV's windshield. The SUV continues driving off and the guy gets back in the sedan and chases him down. My friends and I are in total shock and just go straight back to school, skipping the coffee and bagels. We go straight to our guidance counselor and tell him what happened and he just looks at us like, "Well, did you call the cops?" Not for a second did it cross our minds to even look at the license plates. Story 15. Not a cop. Back in my community college days, I went to a Taco Bell across the street in the late morning to review some assignments about an hour before class. I was the only customer during that time, just focused on my work. About 15 minutes later, two huge guys came in to rob the place, dressed very much like you would imagine. I honestly didn't even notice until the lookout started asking me questions about my papers and to stay put. The workers complied, but the safe was on a timer, so we were all stuck in that Taco Bell for about half an hour. During that time, it was getting close to noon and several customers tried to come in, but the lookout, who was a large man, turned away at least a dozen customers, saying that the Taco Bell was closed right before noon. A lot of them were extremely upset that they couldn't have their tacos, but didn't think twice that there was something suspicious about a huge dude in street clothes turning them away. Some terrified random kids sitting inside and with no staff in uniform inside with all the doors unlocked. They ended up getting away with whatever money they took. They didn't rob me, thankfully. No one was hurt. I missed class and had to give a statement to some detectives. But hey, I got a free soda out of the whole thing, so yay. Story 16. Cop here, and I have two stories I could share. I used to work in a small town for the county sheriff's department. I was coming into town and I saw a car belonging to a guy we'll call Jimmy. Jimmy awkwardly parked on the side of the road. Lights on, the car was running. It was about 1:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, so this was out of the ordinary. I pulled over and approached the car. I could see Jimmy's kids playing in the back seat, and I saw Jimmy asleep with an uncovered syringe in the front seat. He was unresponsive, and the kids confirmed my suspicions, and this wouldn't be my first interaction with Jimmy. I called medics and gave treatment. He came out of it as EMS arrived. Second story, same small town, about 4 a.m. It's quiet outside and I parked to get out for a quick break. Halfway through, I heard a very loud sound from the empty desert behind me. I turned my flashlight towards the sound and see Carl, a known hammered guy, stuck and passed out in a cholla. For those who don't know, a cholla is a cactus that is absolutely a pain to get stuck to you. Another deputy and I pulled him out, and from his reaction, it seemed painful. He was transported to the hospital by EMS. 2 months later, I found him passed away in the same spot. Story 17. One Friday night, around 1 a.m., I was patrolling the streets when I noticed some headlights in a cross street that seemed a bit off. I drove around the block and came up behind the car, and then it became clear that it had been in an accident into the side of a parked semi-trailer. I couldn't see the front of the car yet, so I reported it to dispatch as a property damage accident, thinking there were no injuries and said I would update them with more information. As I walked up to the car, I went around to the front to get a better look at the situation. When I saw the full picture, I realized that the small car had slipped into the trailer. There was so much damage to the car that I couldn't see anything, but I was certain this would be so much more than just an accident. Maybe it was wishful thinking or just routine, but I called out, "Police, hello." To my surprise, I heard a man start yelling for help. In short, the guy had been intoxicated and passed out. It wasn't his time because his seat had reclined back and he slid under the trailer. After looking into the incident and checking security cameras, I found out that this happened an hour before I found him, on a busy section of the road. Not a single person had called it in. Stories like this always make me wonder why side impact guards are not mandatory in the States yet. Story 18. I drove up to an apartment where the fire alarm was going off and there were visible flames from what looked like the kitchen window of one apartment. This was a 16-unit apartment with approximately 40 people in it. There were no emergency personnel on the scene. I asked who had called the fire department and no one answered. I asked again. Someone said, "Isn't that what the alarm means?" I understand that some building fire alarms automatically alert the fire department, but this was not one. Nor should anyone assume emergency vehicles are on the way just because the alarm is going off. People had been watching the fire for at least 5 minutes and just talked about the fire department not being there. The station was 1 mile away. I called the fire department and they were there in 3 minutes. Another time was when an NFL game had just ended at 10 p.m. Traffic was a nightmare. As I'm approaching a major intersection, I noticed that lanes aren't moving together, which is odd because all the traffic was moving in the direction of the interstate. Thought maybe it was an accident and people stopped in the lane. Can't see though, so I figured someone would call it if it was an emergency. Finally pull up to the intersection to find an old lady in yellow rain boots and a pink fuzzy hat directing traffic and screaming at cars as they passed. Nobody called it in. Story 19. So there I am in my patrol car. I just started my shift. This was the night after my baby boy was born, and boy was I a proud father. Right as I got in my cruiser that night, I taped a picture of my wife with him in her arms right on my dashboard so I could look at them. On with the story, though. I turned down this road the local town liked to call Abandonedville. It was a single road that happened to have a ton of old abandoned industrial buildings. I usually try and swing by since odd stuff is always happening in places like that. I get all the way to the end of the street where it starts to reintegrate with the rest of the city. That's when I saw this huge man committing a crime. Across the road, there was a diner and people were staring at this happen. No one called the police. I jumped out of my squad car and started running at him. Story 20. I remember one time when I was walking to the local shops to get some food, and a very agitated man came around the corner. He raised his hands and said, "Fine then. Here I am. Arrest me. I know that's what you'll do. That's what you always do. Quick, boss. Cuff me before I do something stupid. Arrest me." I was confused and looked around to see if there were any other people involved or any clue as to what I had done. I made sure my radio was on in case I just missed a job or one was about to be announced, but nothing came through. I thought, why not just go along with it? So I handcuffed him and told him he was under arrest, and asked him what he was being arrested for. He looked puzzled and asked, "Didn't someone call you?" I replied, "No, I'm here to get some lunch." He suddenly looked quite annoyed with himself. "Well, what are you arresting me for?" I said, "You told me to. Do you not want to be arrested?" He responded, "Well, I don't know. Geez, Finally, someone else came around the corner, and I figured out that he had a heated argument with his partner at the shops and walked off thinking the police would be called. He also thought he would be arrested for breaching a restraining order against the woman, except there wasn't one. He had just been trespassed from her house after the last incident, and he didn't know the difference. I got another police unit to give him a ride out of the area, and he was quite grateful. "Thanks for letting me go, boss," I said. "Well, I had nothing to arrest you for. You arrested yourself." Story 21. I'm a security guard, not a police officer, but I have a story about the bystander effect. I work at a shopping mall in a decent part of town, not the rich area, but not bad either. The place where I work has a bar that's themed like an Irish pub, and on St. Patrick's Day, they get a huge crowd, even though the only Irish thing about the place is the name. Last year on St. Patrick's Day, the bar was expecting a big crowd, so they called in their whole security team, which included 8 big guys wearing green shirts. I don't work for the bar. I work for the owner of the property, so their crowd is their responsibility, and everything else in the lot is mine. Even though I'm not their security, I'm friendly with some of their bouncers, and we share information about people we should watch out for. I was on duty, and part of my job is to stand at the opposite end of the lot from the bar for about 20 minutes to keep an eye on the business there. Remember, the bar isn't my job, it's the bouncers. When it was time for my patrol, I walked around and passed by the long line outside the bar to check my spots, one of which is near their entrance. The guys at the door gave me strange looks as I passed by, but no one said anything, and I thought they were just busy with the crowd. I went around the corner past the bar to a smaller parking area where they had set up 2 portable toilets for the customers. One of their bouncers was there, and when he saw me, he came over and said he had a problem and didn't know what to do, so he asked for my help. I'm the kind of person who can't say no when someone asks for help, so I asked what was going on. He told me they had removed one of their customers after finding him being on something in the bar. The guy had been running around outside, near the line in the bathrooms for 15 minutes before locking himself in a portable toilet. I asked if they called the police, and he said yes, someone had. Then we heard noises from inside the portable toilet, so I went and knocked on the door to ask if the guy was okay. His speech was so slurred that I could only understand a few words, but seconds later the door opened and the guy came out. I asked if he was okay and who he was there with, but I couldn't understand anything else he said. I told him to sit down and wait, but he just started walking in circles around the lot, talking nonsense. Another bouncer came over, so I asked him when they had called the police so I could figure out when they might arrive. He said straight out that none of them had called the police because they thought I would find the guy soon enough, and no one in their crowd had called the police, even though there were easily 100 or so people out there. I called the police right away. It only took a few minutes for them to respond because there were already patrols out looking for intoxicated drivers. They also sent an ambulance. I'm not sure what happened after they took the guy away because my boss told me to get back on patrol once the police and ambulance had him. But I was pretty upset with the bar security team after that. Story 22. I was driving home at the end of my shift when I saw a low-priority call appear on my in-car computer. It was for a woman who had called because there was a strange car parked in front of her house. It was around 1 a.m. I decided to stop by and check it out. When I arrived, I found the car wasn't just parked. It had been in an accident into a tree in her yard, and all the doors in the trunk were open. There was no one around. I checked the license plate and was standing in the street when I heard a voice say, "Excuse me, sir, can you help me?" A guy walked out of the shadows between 2 houses across the street. I checked him and discovered he had been in another accident. He was still awake, but wouldn't tell me who did this to him or what was happening. It stayed a mystery for about the next 20 minutes until another police unit in the area stopped a guy walking down the street with a carburetor. He said he was just waiting for a ride, but he had the same last name as the registered owner of the car, so he was detained. After listening to a long story full of lies and tracking down some of the other people involved, we got a rough idea of what had happened. It turned out the car was being driven by the guy with the carburetor, was a member of the local group, had been speeding through a neighborhood controlled by a different group. That group got into a car and chased him, which led him into the woman's front yard. The guy with the carburetor and his friend ran away on foot, but he remembered there was a valuable carburetor in the trunk, so he went back to get it. By then, the other group was there and they robbed him of his sunglasses. They gave them his sunglasses but kept the carburetor. Story 23. Obligatory, not a police officer, but this happened to me. I had worked a Saturday shift and a colleague offered me a ride home. I said no at first, thinking I'd be fine taking the bus, but she insisted. We got into her car and started chatting. She drove about 60 feet down the road and then began making a strange noise. I asked if she was okay, but she didn't really respond. She drove through a red light, turned a corner, and then pulled over, still making odd noises and not answering me. I managed to open my door and a woman came over and said, "You just went through a red light. Oh my God." I said, "Yeah, sorry." But the woman just walked away, completely ignoring the situation and the fact that I was upset and my friend was seriously ill. I realized something was very wrong, so I called emergency services. I thought my colleague might be having heart problems, but it turned out she was having a medical emergency right in front of me. The whole time I was on the phone waiting for the ambulance. We were parked in front of a busy store with people standing there watching. Not one person came over to help or even called for help. It was very clear that something serious was happening, and the only time anyone came close was when she was being put into the ambulance. And even then, they were just there to stare. I followed the ambulance in her car to the hospital, and as I did, I gave the people who were watching a hand gesture to show how upset I was with them. I spent 5 hours at the hospital with her until her family could get there from the other side of the country. She survived, but she'll never be the same. I now refuse to shop at that store. The owner was one of the people who just watched. It makes me shiver to think that if she had been alone, no one would have done anything, and she probably would have ended right there. Story 24. Not a police officer, but I have a story to share. I was walking down the street in Memphis on a really hot day. It was 90 degrees and there was an ozone warning. This meant that the layer of ozone in the atmosphere was very thin, which made the heat feel even worse. It turned a 90-degree day into what felt like 120 degrees. Memphis even has a program where you can ride buses for just a quarter in ozone days to help keep some of the homeless population from getting too hot. It's that serious. The only reason I was out in the heat was to buy supplies to make my partner a birthday cake. It was his birthday, and I'd waited until the last minute to do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been outside in that heat for anything. I was walking through a residential neighborhood when I heard a strange noise, like a lot of cats meowing. I couldn't figure out what it was, but I thought it wasn't a big deal, so I kept walking. The noise got louder, and I thought maybe I should cross the street, so against my better judgment, I did. As I crossed the street, I saw 2 little blonde kids. I asked them where their parents were, and the kids were completely hysterical. They were screaming, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. I walked around trying to find a parent and saw a woman in her front porch. She told me to call 911, and I called them as fast as I could. It turned out she had been there for 4 hours, and her kids had been trying to get the attention of anyone walking by to find their mom, but no one had stopped to help. Hundreds of cars had driven by, and nothing was done. The paramedic said if she had been out there for another hour, she would have passed away. It was crazy. I have no idea what happened to her. She tried to explain it to me, but her words didn't make any sense. I never found out what happened to her after the ambulance took her away. I just hope the kids were okay and that the mom was okay too. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.